Jon Snow stood upon the highest walkway of the wall, the bitter wind biting at his cheeks and tugging at the thick black fur of his cloak. It was deep winter now, and the endless expanse of ice and snow beyond the wall stretched outward in an unbroken sea of white. Crystalline shards of hoarfrost had gathered on his eyelashes, and his breath plumed in the air. Though he had grown used to the chill in the many months since his return from the War of the Five Kings, on this night, even his bones felt cold. The sun sank low, painting the sky in bands of soft gold that bled into bruised purple. Night pressed in swiftly. Winter, it seemed, was truly here, and with it, new omens whispered in the darkest corners of Castle Black. He had heard the rumors before, whispers carried by the wildlings who had ventured to the far, forgotten edges of the north. Tales of monstrous shapes moving across glaciers, silhouettes with wings like sails on a frozen sea. Rumors of an ancient creature, part myth, part menace, drifting through the blackest nights beyond the world of men. Some said it was the spirit of winter itself, an ancient and wrathful god. Others called it an ice dragon, older than memory, formed from the primal frost that had once engulfed the entire world in the long night. Jon Snow, a man who had once been as skeptical as any, had learned harsh lessons about the real dangers and wonders that lurked beyond the wall. White Walkers were no myth. Giants existed. Wights rose at the command of the dead. So why not an ice dragon? He leaned forward, his gloved hands clutching the icy stone parapet, pitted and worn with age. The cold was nearly unendurable, but he did not pull away. Instead, he stared north, trying to see beyond the horizon. Whatever lay out there, friend or foe, it was wise to be prepared. Ever since the war for the dawn had ended, there had been a fragile peace across the land, but winter had not abated. The snows had not ceased. The nights had grown longer and longer, devouring the days. Some nights, the auroras danced across the sky, painting the heavens with swirling rivers of green and silver and faint purple. Old Nan's tales whispered in the back of Jon's mind, though he could not recall every detail. He had never forgotten his duty as Lord Commander, even after bending the knee to unite all men against the Great Other. Although his title was lost and regained, transformed in the fires of war, he knew no other life but one of service. As darkness gathered on the horizon, he realized he had come here to watch, as if the emptiness beyond the wall called to him. Snow crunched behind him, and Jon turned to see Tormund Giantsbane approach. "The men are ready," Tormund growled through a thick beard dusted with fresh snow. His breath billowed hot. "Though they don't like this foray, Jon Snow. They say the land beyond the Frostfangs has been restless." Jon's gaze lingered on the wilderness. "I've heard the stories. Giants traveling in droves, wights not seen since the Night King's fall. Unexplained vanishings near the glacier pass. An ice dragon." He paused at the last phrase, letting the weight of the words settle. "Is there any truth to it, Tormund?" Tormund spat into the snow. "You know wildlings. We spin tales and tales about every beast that moves in the night. But this one maybe isn't just a tale. Too many have spoken the same words, wings of stormy gray, eyes like pale moons, breath cold enough to freeze a man's blood in his veins. Could be a frightened bear that's grown wings in rumor, but I say let's find out." Jon nodded, though apprehension clutched at his stomach. "We need to confirm what's happening out there. Another threat we don't see coming might cost us everything we fought to keep." The next morning, a small party, barely more than 24 men, ventured beyond the wall at dawn. The great gates opened, the heavy wood creaking, iron chains groaning under the strain, and they rode out across the barren waste where once an army of the dead had marched. The sky was iron gray, clouds thick with the promise of more snow. Jon rode at the head on a sturdy Garen, with Ghost padding alongside, the direwolf's red eyes scanning the white emptiness as if searching for danger with every step. Tormund was right beside them, exchanging jokes with the other free folk who had volunteered for the mission. Their breath mingled with the cold air, plumes of steam rising from the horses' nostrils. Daylight was pale in this season, more a suffused glow than a proper illumination. Shadows blurred and distances grew deceptive. Snow dunes shaped by wind and time could appear like looming hills or vanish at a closer vantage, revealing themselves to be nothing but drifts. They traveled quietly, wary of hidden threats. Wildlings had described entire villages decimated, battered by fierce storms and rumored sightings of a winged beast in the swirling blizzards. For days, they pressed onward, forging a path through the shifting snows, braving winds that howled like vengeful spirits. Some nights, Ghost would raise his head and growl at the darkness, but when John peered into the gloom, he saw only endless white and swirling snow. On the fourth day, they found the first sign that something truly unusual was happening. An abandoned wildling camp, half buried in the snow, tents collapsed. A scattering of possessions lay strewn about as though people had fled in haste. Tracks half erased by blowing drifts led away into the distance, but the footprints had melted or been covered so badly that they couldn't see who or what might have taken the inhabitants. The only sound was the eerie whistling of the wind through the tattered remains of canvas. Even Tormund, who had teased and laughed the previous days, fell silent. John dismounted carefully, stepping among the remnants. He noted blood on the snow. Spatters, dark and frozen, near the largest of the torn tents. "We're too late," Tormund said, voice low. "Whatever happened here, they're gone." John knelt by the bloodstains, scraping at the ice with the tip of a dagger. He saw only the dark residue, half frozen. The pattern looked almost like slash marks, but he couldn't be certain. Did they run? Or were they taken? The men around him exchanged worried looks. "Look up," one of the free folk said, pointing to a tall wooden post near the camp's edge. It had been splintered near the top, as though something powerful had torn it apart. What could do that? John's lips pressed into a thin line. If it's an ice dragon, as the rumors say, it must be large indeed to shatter timbers. They pressed on. Morale dipped. The knowledge of violence so near cast a grim pall over the group. They no longer jested around the campfires. The wind groaned each night, and men huddled closer, eyes darting to the sky at the slightest flutter of shadows. Ghost prowled the periphery, tense and alert. Tormund muttered under his breath about the old stories, how an ice dragon's presence could chill the very air for leagues, bringing deeper snows and vicious storms. John tried to dismiss the old wives' tales, but the further they ventured, the more savage the weather became. Gusts lashed them, temperatures plummeted, and a perpetual gloom haunted the northern horizon. Their only guidance was the half-remembered directions from a wildling scout who had claimed to see the beast near the Frostfangs. So they angled northwest, heading towards the jagged silhouette of the mountain range, forging a path through a treacherous valley. Ridges rose on either side, crowned by ice-laden pines bent under the snow's weight. Ominous shapes flickered at the edges of sight, as if watchers lurked among the storm-bent trees. Often, John felt as though a presence weighed upon him, a silent sentinel in the distance. Ghost's hackles rose more than once, and the dire wolf stared off into the swirling snow, lips curling in a silent snarl. Near dusk on the seventh day, they found a new horror. The half-eaten carcass of a giant boar lay frozen in a clearing. The creature must have weighed twice as much as a warhorse. Yet something had ripped it open with savage force. The frosted hide bore gouges that looked like claw or teeth marks as wide as a man's head. The boar's blood had turned to a dull red crust on the ice, its innards scattered about like some grotesque feast for crows. But no crows circled here. Even scavengers seemed too fearful to approach. John and Tormund exchanged a grim look. "Men didn't do this," Tormund observed, running a calloused hand over the boar's frozen hide. "A bear or direwolf pack, maybe. But—" He trailed off, and the unspoken possibility hung in the air. None dared utter the words, or an ice dragon's hungry jaws. They pressed onward, climbing higher into the mountains, until the days blurred with the nights. The swirling storms turned the world into a patchwork of shifting gray and battered the group relentlessly. Horses slipped, men fell, and exhaustion gnawed their spirits. Food supplies dwindled. Yet John persevered. He had committed to discovering the source of these rumors to protect the realm. Giving up was not an option. On the 10th day, they reached a high pass that snaked between jagged peaks, the wind funneling through like a howling beast. From there, they glimpsed a frozen valley below, a vast basin blanketed in pristine white. There was an otherworldly hush to it, as if sound itself had fled. The snows reflected the fading light with a pearly glow. More tellingly, the valley's center was marred by a dark scar, a massive, gaping rift in the ice, perhaps carved by some unimaginable force. The group descended toward it cautiously, hearts hammering in their chests. At the lip of this ravine, they found enormous footprints pressed into the snow. Each indentation was 3 times the length of a man's boot and shaped unlike any living creature John had ever seen. Not the splayed paw of a bear nor the four-toed indentation of a dire wolf. These prints ended in savage claws arranged in a pattern that hinted at wings dragging or scraping the ground. An odor of cold and sulfur clung to the air, so faint that only Ghost's flaring nostrils revealed something amiss. No one spoke for a long moment as they surveyed the massive prints leading into the depths of the ravine. Tormund let out a low, nervous laugh. "I guess this is the proof we needed, Jon Snow. What do we do now?" Jon's heart pounded. He forced himself to speak calmly. "We find it. Or it finds us. Either way, we should know what we're dealing with." They followed the footprints, creeping through the ravine with bows at the ready. Ghost stayed close to Jon, tense and silent, ears twitching at every distant crack of ice or gust of wind. The steep walls of the ravine rose on either side, striations of ancient ice lit by the wan light. Their torches and lanterns cast flickering shapes that danced along the walls, illusions of movement. The footprints continued, deeper and deeper, until the ravine opened into a cavernous hollow, half-covered by a vault of ice overhead. It looked as if some ancient glacier had split open, forming a frozen cathedral. At first, Jon saw only swirling snow. Then, at the far side of that vast chamber, he caught sight of something that made his breath catch. A tremendous shape lay curled upon the ice, pale as the snows around it so that only its faint outline distinguished it from the surroundings. Spiked ridges extended along a serpentine neck, trailing to a barbed tail. Its wings were folded along its sides, translucent membranes glimmering like hoarfrost. The creature's head was crowned with curved horns that resembled shards of blue ice. Even in slumber, it radiated an otherworldly presence, as though the cold itself originated from its body. Jon felt as if his heart had lodged in his throat. He swallowed, trying to calm his swirling thoughts. A real ice dragon. It had to be. A being of legend, older than the wall, older perhaps than the White Walkers themselves, slumbering here in secret. The beast was colossal, easily rivaling Daenerys's dragons in size. Possibly larger. Its skin, or scales, reflected the shifting blue and white of the ice around it, blending so perfectly that it might vanish from sight if one did not stare hard enough. A gust of wind swept through the cavern, causing the creature's flank to shift. The men froze, hearts pounding. Tormund's knuckles whitened on the hilt of his axe. Jon held up a hand, motioning for silence. They scarcely dared to breathe. Gradually, the creature settled again. It had not truly woken, but something in its posture suggested a restless slumber. Jon felt a peculiar tug of awe and dread. To face a dragon of fire was perilous enough, but this creature embodied the biting essence of winter itself. How would a man fight such a beast if it came to that? He took a step forward without thinking, as if drawn by some invisible tether. His foot crunched on a patch of ice, a noise startlingly loud in the stillness. The dragon's head jerked upright with fluid speed. Its eyes snapped open, revealing pale irises that glowed with a faint, bluish radiance. A rumble like distant thunder emanated from its throat. The men behind Jon shrank back, some raising bows, others cursing under their breath. Jon's heart hammered. He slowly lifted a hand as if to placate the monster. The dragon's gaze fixed on him with a piercing intensity, a silent challenge. Its breath poured in slow bursts, and Jon felt the chill intensify. Frost gathered on his beard. Icicles formed on the edges of his cloak. Every instinct told him to run, but he held his ground, mind racing with memories of Daenerys's dragons, how she had approached them with a strange mixture of fearlessness and empathy. Could the same apply here? One of the men let out a yelp of terror and fired an arrow. The shaft whizzed past Jon's shoulder, striking the ice dragon's flank. The arrow shattered upon contact, bursting into splinters of wood that clattered uselessly to the ice. The dragon roared, a sound that was like glaciers grinding together, accompanied by a blast of frigid wind. In an instant, the beast unfurled its wings, rising to its full height, tail lashing. Shards of ice rained from the cavern's ceiling. A primal terror seized the men, and Tormund howled for everyone to take cover. Jon reacted on instinct, diving to the ground as the dragon's maw opened. A wave of white-blue frost billowed out, lancing across the cavern. Where the breath struck, the ice thickened. Men who were caught in its direct path froze mid-scream, skin turning blue, eyes wide with mortal shock. Their forms toppled to the ground and shattered like glass. In seconds, half a dozen were lost, their bodies reduced to frozen shards. Horror welled in Jon's gut. This was unlike dragonfire's scorching flames. This was a deathly cold that destroyed flesh and bone with merciless swiftness. "Run!" Tormund bellowed, retreating behind a stalagmite of ice. The survivors scrambled for cover. Ghost growled, trying to circle the beast, but Jon called him back. This was not an opponent any dire wolf could fight. Another wave of cold breath roiled across the chamber, cracking the ice floor in some spots. Splinters of frozen rock exploded into the air. With no plan but to survive, Jon ducked behind a jagged outcropping of ice, pressing himself flush to its surface. Panic warred with reason. He glanced around. Many of the men lay unmoving, turned to ice and shattered. Tormund was still alive, panting behind another spur of ice across the cavern. The dragon stomped with unimaginable weight, its roar shaking the walls. Jon suspected that if the beast unleashed more of its frost breath, few would live to tell of it. He had to do something. But what? He shouted to the others, voice echoing above the din, "Fall back. We have to draw it out." If they remained pinned in this cavern, the ice dragon would pick them off with ease. They needed open ground or a chance to flee entirely. But Jon's sense of duty demanded he not simply abandon the mission. Others would find this beast eventually, or it would find them. Better to face it now than leave it to roam the north unchecked. By chance, his gaze flickered to the far side, where the cavern widened into a tunnel filled with columns of ice. If they could lead the dragon through there, perhaps the narrower space might limit its wings. It was a mad plan, but it was all Jon had. He gestured to Tormund, pointing toward the tunnel. The big man's eyes darted that way, and he nodded grimly. Together, they emerged from cover, yelling and waving weapons in the air to draw the beast's attention. The dragon swung its massive head toward them, jaws parting in another bone-chilling roar. Jon sprinted across the slick ice, nearly losing his footing. Tormund followed, shouting an endless string of curses. The dragon reared back, inhaling for another blast of freezing breath. Jon could feel the drop in temperature, as if the beast drew warmth from the air to power its lethal exhalation. At the last moment, Jon dove behind another column of ice, Tormund rolling behind an outcropping. The frost breath swept past them in a blinding torrent of glittering shards. The top half of the column cracked and collapsed, smashing into shards all around Jon. Icy fragments rained down, slicing at his exposed skin. "Keep moving," Jon shouted. They had to lure the dragon deeper, maybe even bring the roof down on it. The survivors, only a handful remained, took up the call, darting from hiding place to hiding place, each one drawing the dragon's ire for a moment. Slowly, step by step, they guided it toward the tunnel. The beast advanced, scraping enormous claws on the ice, each footstep sending tremors through the ground. Its wings scraped the cavern ceiling, dislodging great hunks of icicles that crashed onto the floor. When the ice dragon reached the narrower tunnel, its wings were forced partially closed, limiting its maneuvers. Still it pressed forward, driven by rage or territorial instinct. Jon clutched Longclaw, though what use could Valyrian steel be against a beast of living winter? He recalled Daenerys' stories of how dragon scales were nearly impervious to normal blades. Even so, he had no other weapon that might pierce its hide. The next moments were chaos. Tormund, with reckless bravery, heaved his axe at the dragon's flank. The weapon clanged off the scales, leaving only a faint scratch. Another wildling thrust a spear at its belly, but the tip snapped, showering shards of flint. The dragon roared, lashing out with a claw. The man was flung across the tunnel, bones crunching on impact. The walls rattled with the dragon's rage. Frost spread in arcs whenever it unleashed its breath. More men succumbed, their frozen remains fracturing on the ground. Jon's mind spun. How could they hope to survive? In the confusion, Jon slipped on the treacherous ice and went sprawling, losing his grip on Longclaw. He slid several yards right into the beast's path. The dragon's head swung down, jaws gaping, frigid breath leaking from its maw in swirling mist. Its pale eyes narrowed, and it loomed over him, a swirling aura of winter incarnate. In that fraction of a second, Jon felt his heart thunder in his ears. Ghost barked, bounding forward to protect him. Tormund shouted from behind. But it was too late. Jon was trapped. He gazed up at the dragon, fully expecting to meet death. Yet something strange flickered in the creature's gaze. Another presence seemed to stir inside those icy orbs. For all its terror, the beast did not immediately unleash its freezing breath. Instead, it lowered its massive head, sniffing at Jon with a slow, deep intake of air that sent tendrils of freezing wind across Jon's skin. It was as though the dragon recognized something in him, or perhaps found him curious. Jon could barely breathe. His lungs felt raw from the extreme cold radiating from the beast's body. He dared not move. Ghost stood beside him, lips curled back. But the dire wolf too seemed hesitant. The dragon's nostrils flared once more, and it let out a sound, half hiss, half growl, as though uncertain. Its wings shifted, scraping the tunnel walls. sending a cascade of icicles clattering to the ground. Then, in a moment that defied all logic, it pulled back slightly, no longer poised to strike. Tormund and the others looked on, dumbfounded. Jon blinked, half expecting to have been turned into a block of ice. Yet he was still alive, and the dragon, though obviously capable of annihilating him, held off. Summoning courage, Jon slowly extended his hand, palm outward. His memories of Regal and Drogon surfaced, of how Daenerys had first allowed him near her dragons when he showed no fear, only respect. This was pure madness, he knew. But madness was all that remained. The ice dragon's pupils contracted, focusing on Jon's hand. Its breath rumbled, swirling out in a faint cloud. It took another step forward, close enough that Jon could see the cracks and whirls in the dragon's scales, like living glaciers under the faint torchlight. Then, ever so gently, the dragon pressed the tip of its snout against Jon's outstretched hand. The cold was excruciating, stabbing through the thick glove, biting into flesh. Jon gasped, eyes watering. Frost formed on his fingers, so cold it stung like fire. But the dragon did not harm him beyond that. Instead, it emitted a low, resonant sound that reverberated in Jon's chest. Slowly, half in a trance, Jon placed his other hand on the dragon's snout, wincing as the bitter cold intensified. The men behind him muttered oaths of shock and disbelief. Tormund was pale as a ghost. Ghost tilted his head, uncertain but no longer growling. Jon felt as if he had touched the essence of winter itself. But there was a strange bond that sparked between them, some intuitive recognition. The dragon's eyes locked on his, and he felt a shiver travel the length of his spine, something akin to awe and dread combined. For a moment, Jon forgot the carnage that had led them here. He forgot the men they had lost. All that existed was this inexplicable connection with a creature of legend. In the ancient tongues, men called dragons fire-made flesh, but this was winter incarnate, a being of cold that could freeze hearts with a single breath. Yet, for reasons Jon could not fathom, it had chosen not to kill him. He heard Tormund's voice like a distant echo. "Jon, what in all the hells are you doing?" Jon shook himself free of the trance. He slowly withdrew his hands. Pain shot up his arms from the raw cold. The ice dragon rumbled again, stepping back, turning its gaze upon the rest of the men. Jon moved between them, raising his arms as if to shield them. "Easy," he whispered, though he doubted the dragon could understand his words. Yet maybe it could sense his intent. The creature snorted, vapor coiling from its nostrils. Then, as if losing interest, it folded its great wings. The swirling aura of frost seemed to lessen by a fraction. Cautiously, Tormund moved closer, brandishing his axe in a half-guard. The ice dragon watched, tail lashing slowly. Jon turned, voice hushed but firm. "Lower your weapons," he said. Some men complied, glancing at one another fearfully. Others hesitated, but Tormund was the first to bury the blade of his axe in the ice, a gesture of neutrality. One by one, the others mimicked him, though the tension in the tunnel was palpable. And so it was that Jon Snow and his battered group found themselves face to face with a living legend. They stood still, hearts pounding, as the dragon regarded them warily. One man coughed, the sound echoing in the tunnel, and the dragon's head snapped in his direction with a quiet growl. Jon raised his hand again, a silent plea for calm. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity. In time, he took a tentative step forward. The ice dragon let him approach. Jon's breath caught in his throat as he reached out once more, this time trying to soothe the beast with a slow, deliberate touch along the side of its neck. Despite his thick glove, his flesh burned with cold. Yet the dragon did not pull away or attack. He felt a pulse, or perhaps just the slow shift of muscle beneath the icy scales. It was alive, so alien, yet undeniably alive. A fleeting memory of Regal flitted through Jon's mind, how that dragon had allowed him to climb upon its back. Could it be possible that a similar bond might be forged here, with this beast of winter? The men behind him whispered in awe, but no one dared move. At length, Jon felt a sudden wave of dizziness, as if he'd tapped into some primal force far beyond his ken. His vision blurred. He steadied himself on the dragon's flank, panting, the cold ravaging his lungs. Ghost whined softly, pressing against Jon's leg. In that moment, Jon felt something resonate deep within him, a memory or dream he could not quite place. Words flickered in his mind. The dragon has 3 heads. Targaryen blood. Stark blood. the union of ice and fire. Prophecies he had never fully understood. Yet here he was, a man with Targaryen blood, a son of the north, touching a creature of pure cold, an ice dragon. It felt almost preordained, as though an invisible hand guided him. A soft glow filled the tunnel, reflecting from the dragon's scales. Jon realized that Tormund's torchlight revealed swirling patterns along the beast's hide, lines of faint silver and blue that seemed to shift like auroras. With a curious croon, the dragon lowered its head. Jon saw in its gaze no malice, only a wild wariness. He let out a long, trembling breath, turning back to Tormund. "It's letting us near," he said. "For now at least." "It killed our men," Tormund growled, though his anger was tempered by fear. "Froze them. Then it changed its mind about the rest of us." Jon nodded, a hollow sadness in his chest at the loss of so many. "They shot first. Perhaps it was simply defending itself. It's more than we could have hoped for that it hasn't killed us all." Tormund shook his head, stepping closer. The air around the dragon was thick with frost, making each breath sting. "Madness. You're half dead from the cold, Jon Snow. But if you say we stand down, I trust you." "What now?" Jon looked at the dragon. It blinked slowly, shifting its bulk on the ice, spines scraping the ceiling. Some primal instinct bubbled up in Jon, suggesting that perhaps this dragon recognized something in him, or recognized something that made it stay its wrath. Daenerys had once told him that dragons were not slaves, that they would accept or reject a rider by their own will. Jon had never dreamed that might apply to an ice dragon. But if it did, perhaps this beast had already made its choice. He sheathed Longclaw carefully, making sure the dragon saw the gesture. Then, step by measured step, he approached its shoulder, placing a hand on the dense ridges of scale and ice. The men watched in stunned silence as he tested his weight, pulling himself up, trying to mount the beast. The cold stabbed him relentlessly, as though it would flay the flesh from his bones. Pain seized his body, but he clenched his teeth. The dragon made a low rumble but did not shake him off. Slowly, with shaking limbs, Jon managed to straddle the base of its neck, hooking one leg over its broad spine where the ridges would give him purchase. He felt the creature's deep breath, a tide of frigid air that caused his clothes and cloak to stiffen with frost. Jon closed his eyes, fighting the shivers, focusing on the moment. Tormund's voice rang out below, equal parts awe and lunacy. "Are you out of your bloody mind, Jon Snow?" Jon almost laughed. "Probably," he called back, teeth chattering. But if Daenerys Targaryen had flown on dragons of fire, perhaps he, part Stark, part Targaryen, could fly on a dragon of ice. The notion seemed absurd, yet he could feel the creature's muscles shifting under him, a readiness to move. A primal energy hummed through its body. Without warning, the dragon lurched, stepping forward. Jon clutched at the spines, pressing his body close to its neck to avoid being thrown. Tormund and the others leapt aside. The beast ambled toward the cavern's entrance, wings scraping the walls. Massive clods of ice fell, echoing through the tunnel. With another deafening roar, it burst from the mouth of the tunnel out into the open air of the frozen valley. The men rushed to follow, though at a safe distance. Outside, night had fallen and the sky glowed with faint starlight veiled by swirling snow. The temperature felt even colder, if such a thing were possible. The ice dragon raised its head, inhaling the frigid wind as though savoring it. Ghost bounded out of the tunnel behind them, barking in alarm at the sight of Jon high on the dragon's back. Jon shut his eyes briefly, mustering courage. He sensed the beast's anticipation, as if it might leap into the sky at any moment. Could he guide it? Did he even want to? His body screamed from the cold, threatening to shut down. He forced himself to remain conscious, gripping the dragon's scales. "Please," he murmured through chattering teeth, though he did not know if he pleaded with the dragon or the gods. "Do not abandon me." He thought of the realm, of all who depended on him. Thought of how another monstrous threat could lay waste to everything. If this dragon flew south, unstoppable, it could bring a new long night. The dragon unfurled its wings, a crackling cascade of ice crystals drifting down. Its wingspan was tremendous, the membranes shining with ghostly luminescence. With a heavy crouch, it coiled its powerful hind legs. Then, in an explosion of motion, it launched itself skyward. Jon's stomach lurched as they rose, the wind battering him. He clung fiercely, feeling the raw power of the dragon's muscles straining beneath his legs. The ground dropped away, and in moments they were aloft, soaring over the frozen valley with a gale roaring in Jon's ears. He felt no warmth. Instead, the wind buffeted him with needle-like shards of ice. His face felt numb, and his limbs trembled. He tried to remember how Daenerys had once guided Regal, but this beast's temperament was entirely different. As they climbed higher, the cold intensified to a lethal degree. Frost caked Jon's eyebrows and hair. He felt his eyelashes freeze together, and he had to blink hard to keep them open. The dragon roared, exulting in the flight, twisting through the night sky. Below, the valley was a ghostly white patch. Far beyond the horizon, the Frostfangs rose in jagged silhouettes. They soared for what felt like hours, or perhaps it was only minutes. Jon's sense of time faltered. His vision swam, and a creeping lethargy seized his limbs. The fierce cold threatened to claim him. Memories flitted across his mind in the delirium. Winterfell's courtyard, the crypts, Ygritte in the cave, his vows to the Night's Watch, Daenerys's dragons roaring above King's Landing. Now he was on the back of an ice dragon, a possibility he never could have imagined. The beast circled once more, then began a rapid descent, gliding toward the valley floor. Jon felt a rush of vertigo. They touched down with a thunderous impact, sending up swirls of snow. The dragon folded its wings, letting out a prolonged rumble. Jon toppled from its back, landing hard in the snow. His entire body screamed in agony from the cold. Tormund and the remaining men rushed forward, uncertain whether to help Jon or to run from the dragon. Ghost reached Jon first, licking at his face, whining with distress. Tormund knelt, shaking Jon's shoulders. "You're mad," he kept saying. "Bloody mad." Jon managed a trembling smile. "The dragon, it let me ride." His teeth clacked together uncontrollably as he tried to speak. Incredibly, the ice dragon stayed near, looming over them. Wisps of frost drifted from its jaws, and its pale eyes surveyed them with a newfound curiosity or perhaps indifference. Jon tried to stand, swaying on numb legs. Tormund gripped his arm, helping him up. The other men hung back, eyes round as saucers. "What are we supposed to do with this, beast?" Tormund demanded. "It killed half our group. Should we flee?" Jon looked up at the dragon, a monstrous silhouette against the dark sky. The stars shimmered behind it. "We can't kill it," he said, voice ragged. "We might have awakened something that's been dormant for centuries. For good or ill, it's here now." He felt an unspoken question swirling in his mind. Why hadn't it killed him? Tormund voiced a similar thought. "Why spare you, Snow?" Jon shook his head. "I wish I knew." A fleeting idea surfaced that his partial Targaryen heritage somehow resonated with dragons, be they of fire or ice. Or perhaps, in a cosmic sense, as a Stark he was kin to the winter that the creature embodied. It was impossible to say. Only the old gods might know. But the fact remained, the ice dragon had let Jon touch it, climb it, and live. A bond had formed. However tenuous, it might be the key to controlling, if control was even the right word, this fearsome beast. In the days that followed, Jon and the survivors established a makeshift camp in the valley. The ice dragon roosted in the cavern, though it often disappeared at night, presumably hunting. The men were terrified of it, yet it had shown no further aggression, at least when Jon was present. A few times it soared off with a thunder of wings, returning hours later, its snout stained with the blood of whatever prey it had devoured. Jon devoted his energy to recovering from frostbite. Several of his fingers remained numb, and black spots hinted at serious damage. One of the wildlings, who knew basic healing lore, did what he could to treat Jon's wounds and keep his fingers from blackening further. Meanwhile, Tormund grew restless. "We can't stay here forever," he grumbled near the campfire one evening. "We're nearly out of supplies. If we press on, we might cross the mountains and return to Castle Black by another route. But that thing is still with us." Jon watched the beast's silhouette at the cave's entrance, visible by the light of the moon. It perched there, silent and still, like a gargoyle carved from ice. He understood Tormund's concern. The men were uneasy, barely sleeping, certain that at any moment the dragon might unleash its deadly breath on them. But Jon felt a pull he could not explain, a conviction that this dragon was crucial. Perhaps it was a weapon, or an ally, or simply a force that he alone might keep from ravaging the north. Regardless, he could not abandon it. He forced himself to walk toward the dragon, ignoring the stab of pain in his frostbitten toes. Ghost padded beside him. When they drew close, the creature tilted its head, regarding Jon with an alien calm. Tentatively, Jon placed a hand on its flank. Cold radiated from it, but it felt slightly less agonizing than before, as if his body had grown acclimatized. "What do you want?" he whispered, uncertain if the dragon could sense his tone. It let out a soft rumble, then extended a wing. The membrane shimmered, revealing intricate patterns of frosted veins. Jon ran his gloved fingers along it. Little by little, day by day, Jon tested how close the dragon would allow him. He tried to feed it, dragging the carcass of a slain elk near its maw. The dragon accepted, devouring the meat with savage efficiency. Its breath froze the blood spatter in midair. Once he even mustered the courage to climb upon its back again, though he kept to the ground rather than urging it to fly. The beast allowed it, shifting its colossal weight with surprising grace. Jon's men watched in mute fascination, though some whispered that such meddling was unnatural, that only a Targaryen of the old Valyrian line could claim a dragon. Jon paid their whispers no mind. He was who he was, for better or worse. At night, Jon's dreams were troubled. He saw visions of the wall collapsing under waves of frost, of armies of whites rising again, led by a monstrous ice dragon. But then, in other dreams, he glimpsed the flicker of hope, the realms of men, united, forging peace under a sky where both fire and ice soared together. Prophecy or madness, he could not tell. But each morning he awoke with renewed determination. On a cold dawn, 2 weeks after their first encounter, Jon decided to attempt a true flight again. He approached the dragon with a firm resolve, carrying a length of rope and a leather harness he had fashioned as best he could from salvage tack. The men looked on, some crossing themselves with old gestures of superstition. Tormund grunted. "I'll not be burying your pieces if it decides to drop you from 1,000 feet in the air." Jon managed a tight smile. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." With careful deliberation, he laid the harness across the dragon's neck, working around its spines. The beast shifted, rumbling as it sensed the foreign object. Jon spoke softly, not so much words as a soothing tone, the same way one might calm a skittish horse. Incredibly, it allowed him to secure the harness, though the buckles were rudimentary at best. Tormund helped him up and Jon strapped himself in, hooking his legs around the dragon's ridges. His heart hammered, breath steaming. Ghost stood at a distance, whining. Jon nodded to Tormund. "If I don't return." "You're a damn fool, Jon Snow," Tormund said gruffly, but his tone was tinged with respect. "Go, then. Show us what you're made of." Jon pressed his knees into the dragon's flanks, mimicking how he had once seen Daenerys guide her dragons. He lifted a hand, gesturing upward. First, nothing happened. The dragon shifted its weight, turning its massive head to peer at him. Then, as if understanding, it coiled its hind legs, wings flaring wide. Jon gritted his teeth. With a rush of wind, the ice dragon launched into the sky, nearly knocking the men off their feet below. Jon clung for dear life, the harness biting into his shoulders. The ascent was dizzying, a savage vertical climb that left Jon's stomach twisting. Snow flurries stung his face. The valley shrank below, the men and horses nothing but dark specks on an endless plain of white. Above, the sky opened, vast and gray, the sun a faint disk hidden behind clouds. The cold was sharper than any blade, but Jon willed himself to endure. He thought of duty, of the realm, of the new possibilities stirring in his veins. The dragon roared, an echoing cry that rippled through the thin air. Higher they soared, until the peaks of the Frostfangs were level with Jon's vantage. He could see for leagues in every direction, ridges of ice and snow, glaciers shimmering in the weak sunlight. The horizon blurred with storms. A sense of exhilaration, mingled with terror, coursed through him. He guided the dragon gently to the right, and to his wonder, it responded, banking in a wide arc. Jon felt more certain now, leaning into the motion, trusting that his harness would keep him from being flung off. They dove, gaining speed, wind shrieking in Jon's ears. Ice crystals formed on his eyebrows and hair, but adrenaline burned within him. The dragon leveled out, skimming just above a glacier, the tips of its claws scraping lines in the ice. Then it beat its wings powerfully, angling upward again. Jon laughed aloud in spite of himself, a raw, astonished sound. He realized in that fleeting moment that this was freedom, an unimaginable power. But with that power came a grave responsibility. The realms of men had a new visitor from the far north, neither a mindless beast nor wholly understood. If he could foster this bond, perhaps the ice dragon could be swayed to protect rather than destroy. He spent the better part of an hour in the air, testing the beast's responsiveness, pushing back his own limits of endurance. Eventually, the numbness in his limbs grew too severe to ignore. He guided the dragon down, landing in a swirl of powdery snow near their makeshift camp. The men scattered like frightened mice, except for Tormund, who stood his ground, arms folded. Jon dismounted, nearly collapsing as his feet touched the ground. His legs were jelly, and the cold had chewed at every exposed surface. Tormund caught him, helping him stay upright. "That was something," Jon managed between chattering teeth. He unbuckled the harness, letting the dragon shake it off. The beast prowled a short distance away, then settled, curling its tail around its body as it observed the men warily. "Your face," Tormund said with a grimace. "You're half frozen." Jon touched his cheek, feeling the icy numbness. "Worth it," he replied, forcing a small smile. No one slept easy that night. Even so, Jon felt a sense of possibility stirring within him. The following morning, he convened with Tormund and the remaining men around a meager breakfast. "I need to return to Castle Black," Jon said simply. "They must know about this. They must see." "Are you meaning to fly that thing to the wall?" Tormund asked, eyebrows shooting up. Jon nodded. "If it's willing, we can't lead it through the mountains on foot. Too dangerous for everyone, including the dragon. This might be the best way." The others exchanged looks of disbelief and apprehension, but no one openly opposed him. Jon was, in effect, their leader, and after what they had witnessed, they knew better than to argue. The greatest obstacle was the cold, which Jon knew could kill him if he spent hours on the dragon's back again. He'd need warmer gear, furs upon furs, and some method to shield his face. They improvised with layers of pelts, stitching them together into a crude flight suit. By midday, Jon stood beside the dragon once more, looking up at its spined neck. He held a spear tipped with dragonglass in one hand, a precaution, though he doubted it would do much if the dragon turned against him. "Wish me luck," he told Tormund, who only grunted in response. Jon climbed onto the beast, strapping himself in with the harness. A wild swirl of thoughts raced in his mind. Could he truly bring an ice dragon to Castle Black without sowing panic? Would the Night's Watch dare to attack? He could only hope his presence would prevent them from loosing arrows. With a bracing breath, he gestured skyward. The dragon launched itself in an eruption of snow, wings driving powerful gusts against the ground. Jon squinted behind the heavy wraps covering his face, bracing against the impact of wind and cold. Up they soared, over the ridges, following the invisible pull that Jon felt led southward. As they gained altitude, the temperature plummeted, but Jon's layered furs helped stave off the worst. He kept close to the dragon's body, feeling the slow expansion of its ribs as it breathed, each exhalation sending flurries of ice dancing behind them. Below, the white wastes rolled by like a barren sea, dotted by black crags of rock. Hours passed. Jon's muscles ached from the constant shivering and tension. The dragon seemed tireless, riding the frigid currents with ease, occasionally letting out a roar that resonated in the cold air. At times, swirling clouds enveloped them, obscuring the ground entirely, and Jon felt disoriented. But the dragon never faltered, as if it knew this land like an extension of its own flesh. Eventually, the unmistakable silhouette of the wall appeared on the horizon, a pale, colossal barrier rising from the snow, dwarfed only by the immensity of the sky. Jon's heart pounded. He tugged on the harness straps, urging the dragon to descend slowly. As they neared, he spied the sentinels atop the wall, black figures pacing against the white backdrop. Horn blasts echoed faintly, 2 short blasts repeated. The watchers had spotted him. By the time he drew closer, the top of the wall was in an uproar, men running, pointing. Jon prayed they wouldn't loose arrows or scorpion bolts. He tried to circle, giving them a wide berth, letting them see him on the dragon's back. The beast roared, sending spirals of cold wind across the parapets. Jon saw men clutched in terror, some diving for cover. One arrow flew, but it plinked harmlessly off the dragon's shoulder. The creature responded with a bellow, but Jon urged it not to attack. He patted its neck, murmuring a reassurance that likely meant nothing to the creature, but calmed himself at least. He guided it along the length of the wall, searching for a place to land. The courtyard of Castle Black was too cramped. The top of the wall might work, but the platform was not designed to handle so huge a beast. He decided to set down a short distance from the wall on the northern side, where the ground was relatively flat. Once he landed, the men of the watch could come to him. With a sweeping arc, the dragon angled downward, stirring up eddies of snow. They touched down with a tremor, ice fracturing beneath the beast's weight. Jon unstrapped himself, sliding off the dragon's flank. He stumbled, legs wobbly from the hours aloft. The ice dragon folded its wings, letting out a rumbling exhalation. A flurry of movement from the wall signaled that the gates were opening. Dozens of black-clad brothers, armed with spears and bows, emerged cautiously, forming a defensive semicircle. They kept a safe distance, uncertain how to proceed. Jon stepped forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Ghost bounded toward him from among the men. Someone had presumably taken care of the dire wolf after the group parted ways with Tormund. The faithful wolf pressed against Jon, whining in joy. Perhaps Tormund had sent Ghost to signal the watch that Jon might return. "Hold your fire," Jon shouted, voice echoing off the ice. The men hesitated, eyeing the monstrous dragon behind him. Its pale gaze raked over them, a silent threat. One wild move and dozens could die in a storm of frost. "No one shoot," Jon repeated, louder this time. "It's with me." Finally, a few of the senior brothers strode forward. Among them was Dolorous Ed, who had survived all the conflicts and had been left in charge of Castle Black while the realm restructured after the wars. Ed's face was drawn with shock. "Jon, what in the seven hells is this?" Jon peeled away some of the frost-crusted cloth from his face. "An ice dragon," he said simply, the words almost absurd to his own ears. "It's real, Ed. And I think it's bonded to me." Ed stared for a long moment, jaw tight, eyes flicking from Jon to the dragon. "We had ravens about men disappearing beyond the wall," he said slowly. "But this? If it was anyone else, I'd say they were mad." Jon nodded. "I have a small group of free folk out there, Tormund among them. We discovered this creature in the mountains. It killed some of our men before. I don't know how to explain it, but it allowed me to ride. It listens to me sometimes." Ed swallowed hard. The men behind him shuffled nervously as if they stood on the brink of a nightmare. "If it decides to attack, we can't stop it, can we?" "No," Jon admitted. "But I'm hoping that with my guidance it won't. I brought it here because we need to understand it to ensure it doesn't harm the realm." And perhaps he hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Perhaps we can even use it as a force for good. Winter is not over yet, Ed. The storms grow fiercer. If something else arises, if another threat emerges, we might need every advantage we can get." Ed rubbed his face. "Gods help us. This place is cursed." He waved at the assembled brothers. "Stand down, but keep your weapons close. If it shows any sign of aggression, we do what we must." The men shifted uncertainly, but the ring of steel parted slightly. Jon turned, motioning for the dragon to follow. It advanced, sending a ripple of panic through the men, but Jon held up a hand. "Easy," he murmured to the creature, though whether it understood was unknown. At his urging, it stopped a few paces away, exhaling a cloud of frigid mist. The ground beneath its claws crackled with fresh frost. Jon saw fear in the men's eyes, but also curiosity. Few had ever seen a dragon up close, let alone one that looked like living winter. They spent the next hours in tense negotiation, Ed and Jon trying to figure out how to house such a beast. Ultimately, they realized it wanted no stable or enclosed space. The ice dragon was at home in the open, likely preferring the cold expanses north of the wall. For the night, it perched near the wall's base, resting quietly unless someone drew too close. Jon slept fitfully, guarded by Ghost, half expecting to be awoken by screams if the dragon turned violent. But the night passed quietly. In the morning, Jon awoke to find a crowd of black brothers standing at a distance, marveling as the dragon drank from an icy pool it had created by melting and refreezing the ground in a bizarre cycle of frost breath. Ed approached, haggard but calmer. "We sent a raven south," he informed Jon. "The new king in the north, or whatever he calls himself, Lord Paramount. He should know about this." Jon understood. Politics had shifted since the Great War, with various lords and ladies stepping into new roles. "We can't keep this secret," Jon said. "Nor should we. The world has changed. Daenerys's dragons are gone. But this one, it might be the only living dragon left, if you can call it that." The mention of Daenerys brought a pang of grief, but he steeled himself. Her memory lingered, fueling his resolve to do what was best for the realm. The presence of the ice dragon unsettled everyone at Castle Black. Yet in the days that followed, it showed no aggression, provided no one threatened it. Jon devoted himself to caring for it, feeding it by hunting local elk and dire wolves with small groups of rangers. The beast accepted the meals, though it was clearly capable of hunting on its own. Occasionally, Jon flew at short distances, mindful of the men's reactions. Over time, they grew somewhat accustomed to the monstrous silhouette perched outside the gates. Rumors spread quickly, and more folk from the south arrived at the wall to see it for themselves, some out of curiosity, others from fear. A hush fell whenever the creature stirred. So began a precarious new era for Jon Snow. Word of the ice dragon's existence traveled fast. Wildlings who still roamed the northern wastes beheld it in awe, recalling ancient legends. Some claimed it was a harbinger of a second long night. Others insisted it was an omen of balance, the union of ice and fire. Jon had little time for omens. He was consumed by the day-to-day challenge of ensuring the beast remained placid and well-fed while also negotiating with the newly reorganized leadership of the lands of Westeros, who feared the arrival of such a power. Letters arrived from Winterfell, from Lords of the North, from the Vale, from King's Landing, each demanding answers, some calling for the dragon's destruction, others wanting it harnessed as a weapon. Jon responded where he could, writing by candlelight in the commander's chamber. He felt a rising tension. Men still remembered the terror of dragons during the wars of Daenerys Targaryen. Though her fire had been aimed at the White Walkers and occasionally at her enemies, many had witnessed the devastation. Now came a dragon of ice, perhaps more fearsome, and it was rumored to answer only to Jon Snow, a man half in exile. Every letter begged the question, would the realm be safer with the dragon destroyed, or was it better under Jon's guardianship? Meanwhile, winter's grip on the north tightened. Snows fell ceaselessly, burying roads, stranding villages. Patrols from Castle Black struggled to reach outlying settlements of free folk. Supply wagons from the south became sporadic. Yet one advantage emerged. With the ice dragon, Jon could survey vast stretches of territory in hours where otherwise men on horseback would take days. He set out on scouting flights, scanning for lost travelers or white remnants. He found a handful, saving those he could, dispatching whites with dragonglass-tipped spears from the dragon's back. The ice dragon's frost breath was lethal to the dead, shattering them into fragments of bone and ice. Jon discovered, almost by accident, that the White Walkers who still lingered in hiding had no immunity to the dragon's assault. The creature's cold burned colder even than their own unnatural existence. This discovery emboldened Jon. Perhaps this was a new bulwark against any undead threat that might resurface. Yet the realm's distrust remained. Lords from the south demanded an audience. The new king in the north, young Lord Serwyn, who had assumed a short-lived kingship after the Stark line had dwindled, sent a delegation to Castle Black. Jon met them near the wall, the ice dragon perched behind him like a silent sentinel. The lords quaked at the sight, their horses spooked, but they did not turn back. Their leader, a stout man with a wispy beard, spoke with forced bravado. Lord Snow, we come bearing concerns from Winterfell. This creature cannot remain unchecked. Jon inclined his head. I understand your fears. But I ask that you see reason. It has caused no harm since I brought it here. The delegate retorted, no harm yet. But what if it chooses to fly south and freeze our lands? Will you be able to stop it? The unspoken truth hovered. Jon was not entirely sure. But he stood firm. We have a bond. I can ride it, guide it. And I have every intention of preventing any harm. You must trust me as you once trusted me to lead the fight against the Night King. A lengthy negotiation ensued, culminating in an uneasy truce. The northern lords agreed not to send armies against the dragon, provided Jon keep it north of the neck, away from major cities and towns. In return, Jon promised to remain vigilant, to quell any outbreak of violence from the beast, and to continue patrolling for undead remnants. A tenuous balance, but it was all they had. Time passed, measured in weeks and months. The winter snows piled high, burying villages. Yet the ice dragon thrived in the cold, seeming to draw energy from the frigid air. Jon found that his bond with it deepened. He could sense its moods, anticipate its movements. When he climbed onto its back, he no longer trembled quite so severely from the cold, though it was never comfortable. The watchers atop the wall grew used to seeing the dragon perched on the icy plains each dawn, exhaling plumes of frost like an ancient sentinel. Some of the Black Brothers began referring to it as Winter's Scourge, half in jest, half in dread. Occasionally, Tormund and his free folk visited from beyond the mountains, their own fear mingled with respect. They would watch as Jon soared overhead on the dragon's back, scouting for lost hunters or roving creatures. Word spread that some wildlings even began worshipping the beast, seeing it as the rightful master of the far north, a living embodiment of the cold. Jon did not encourage such worship, but he did not suppress it either. Let them have their beliefs if it kept them from fighting. Still, Jon felt the weight of the realm's distrust. Letters continued to arrive, some threatening, some pleading. The southern lords had endured much chaos in recent years, a war of 5 kings, the White Walkers, Daenerys's dragons. They wanted peace, stability. A monstrous new power did not fit into their plans. Jon worried that inevitably someone would provoke a conflict. Yet he remained steadfast. The dragon was not simply a beast of destruction, it was a creature of the north bound to him in ways he could not fully explain. One day, as spring threatened to break the worst of winter's hold, a raven arrived from Winterfell. The king in the north demanded a demonstration, proof that Jon could control the dragon absolutely. They proposed a meeting on the outskirts of the gift, near a vast frozen lake, well away from any settlements. Jon brooded over the request. It felt like a trap, or at least a test, but he could see no recourse. If he refused, suspicion would only deepen. If he agreed, he could display the dragon's obedience, hopefully easing tensions. With some reluctance, he sent back his agreement. When the appointed day came, Jon mounted the ice dragon and flew south. A company of black brothers accompanied him on horseback, carrying what banners the Night's Watch possessed. They arrived at the designated frozen lake, a broad expanse dotted with sparse pine. The king in the north and his retinue waited on the far shore. The wind swept across the ice in fitful gusts, swirling snow devils. As Jon landed, the men flinched, their horses whinnying in terror. The king himself, a youth barely of age, wore a fur-lined cloak and a steel crown hammered into the shape of wolf heads. He trembled when the dragon roared. Jon dismounted, letting the beast settle behind him. "Your Grace," he said, bowing, though he knew the title was tenuous. "You summoned me. We've come in peace." The young king cast a wary eye over the ice dragon, which regarded him with silent menace. "We would see if your words are truth. Show us you can command it." Jon moved nearer to the dragon. He pressed a hand to its flank, feeling the chill seep through his glove. "Rise," he said, voice strong. The creature lifted its head, spines bristling. At Jon's urging, it spread its wings and let out a resonant roar. The king's retinue stumbled back, fear etched on their faces. Jon continued, "Fly," and the dragon launched into the sky with a thunderous clap of air. For several moments it circled overhead, a white speck against the pale clouds. Then Jon motioned for it to land once more. It descended gracefully, alighting near him. Jon placed his hand on its muzzle, meeting its alien gaze. A hush fell over the frozen lake. The king nodded slowly, though sweat beaded on his brow despite the cold. "You have tamed it, it seems." Jon shook his head. "I haven't tamed it. I've earned some measure of trust, nothing more. It is still a free creature." The king's advisors exchanged glances. "Will it remain in the north, away from our lands?" one counselor asked, voice wavering. "You must swear it." Jon paused. He understood their fear. "I have no wish to bring it south unless absolutely necessary," he said. "But if our realm faces another threat from White Walkers or from beyond, I will not hesitate to use every weapon at our disposal." A taut silence followed. The king swallowed. "Then let it be known. Jon Snow, once king in the north, now warden of the far north, shall guard these lands with this beast." The title was a compromise hammered out by the northern lords to acknowledge Jon's role without crowning him. "We will not move against you so long as this dragon remains a shield, not a sword." Jon inclined his head. "So I swear before gods old and new." With that uneasy vow, they parted ways. The king's retinue departed, casting nervous glances over their shoulders at the dragon. Jon mounted once more and soared north, relief tempered by the knowledge that suspicion would not vanish overnight. And so the ice dragon became a fixture at Castle Black, a silent guardian of the realm's northernmost border. Jon took it upon himself to ensure the creature remained fed, content, and unprovoked. In time, Black brothers developed a curious respect for the beast, acknowledging that it had saved countless lives during winter storms by allowing Jon to scout and rescue. Some even said it was more a watchful sentinel than a monster. Jon found himself forging a deeper bond with it every time they flew, though he never lost the sense of awe and danger that clung to its presence. As the months wore on, the snow slowly began to recede, revealing the battered land beneath. Spring, such as it was in the north, arrived. The winds were still cold, but the worst of the storms eased. People rebuilt, reconnected, forging new paths through the drifts. Jon continued his dual role, Lord Commander of sorts, caretaker of a dragon. He wrote to Tormund, inviting the free folk to settle safely in the gift, though many chose to remain in the far wilderness, trusting only in their own ways. The legend of the ice dragon spread, weaving itself into the tapestry of northern folklore. Some said it was an ancient god, awakened by the breach of the White Walkers. Others claimed it was the spirit of the north, taking flesh to guard against future threats. Jon ignored the speculation. He knew only that a fragile peace held. Though no new war brewed, Jon felt the realm's tension simmering just below the surface. Lords in the south could not forget that a dragon, unstoppable, was perched at their doorstep, even if that doorstep was the far side of the world. For now, though, no one dared challenge him. The memories of the Great War were too fresh, the cost of conflict too high. Better to let the watchers on the wall keep watch, even if that included a monstrous ally. Some lords muttered that eventually the next generation might see the ice dragon as a bigger threat, but Jon refused to dwell on future strife. He spent his days training recruits, patrolling on horseback, or scouting by dragonback. By night, he dreamed strange dreams of ice and fire, of dead kings stirring in crypts, of dragons dancing above a land cloaked in night. Yet each dawn he rose, determined to keep the realm safe. The presence of the ice dragon reminded him of the delicate balance that governed the world. Life and death, warmth and cold, ice and fire. He himself was a living intersection of two bloodlines, Stark and Targaryen, two worlds that once seemed irreconcilable. Perhaps the dragon sensed that, or perhaps it was mere coincidence. In moments of solitude, Jon sometimes stood by the beast's side, brushing his hand along its frozen scales, feeling the hum of its breathing. He would whisper secrets to it, confessions of guilt and longing that he could share with no human. He spoke of Daenerys, of the child they never had, of the illusions he once held about honor and duty, of the love he lost in the cold. The dragon never answered, only exhaled faint tendrils of frost, its eyes vast and ancient. Yet in that silent communion, Jon found a measure of peace he had never known. It was as if the creature offered solace in its own alien way, bridging a gap between mortal and myth. On one particularly clear night, under a canopy of blazing stars, Jon mounted the dragon for a solitary flight. He rose above the wall, gliding over the moonlit expanse of snow and ice. The world lay quiet below, unbroken except for the shifting shadows cast by silver beams of moonlight. The air was bitterly cold, but Jon felt alive, each breath a gift. He guided the dragon higher until the wall was just a pale line in the distance. The old scars of war seemed remote, intangible. In that moment, he realized he had found his calling. Not as a king, not as a lord, but as a guardian. A man of the Night's Watch, sworn to protect the realms of men. Only now he did so astride a beast of legend. There was poetry in that, a resolution to the contradictions of his life. Here in the sky, he felt both the wolf and the dragon in his blood. He felt at once alone and at peace, connected to something vast and timeless. They circled back, descending gently to land near the wall. The men on watch gave them wide berth, used to the sight but never complacent. Jon dismounted and patted the ice dragon's flank. Its presence loomed over him, monstrous and quiet. He sensed no malice, only a cold acceptance. Slowly he walked back to the gates, with Ghost padding by his side. As he entered Castle Black, he realized that for the first time in his life, he was neither in exile nor truly at home. He was in a place he had forged, a space between the known and the unknown. A place that perhaps only he could occupy. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, each day a dance of caution and discovery. The ice dragon remained at Castle Black, an awe-inspiring testament to the wonders hidden in the far north. Word reached Jon that the southern lords continued to fret, but none took action against him. The king in the north held his uneasy throne, focusing instead on rebuilding war-ravaged farms and roads. Meanwhile, Jon sustained his quiet vigil, half suspecting that this improbable chapter could not last forever. But for the moment, at least, there was peace and equilibrium as delicate as a crystal of ice, beautiful and fragile. And in that fleeting peace, Jon Snow lived a new purpose, bound by oath and by bond with the wild ice dragon beyond the wall. Should the day come again when darkness rose to challenge the living, he would be ready, perched upon the back of a creature born of winter's chill. The north would be guarded by its adopted son and the primal beast who had chosen him, two living embodiments of the old god's might, forging a future that neither men nor gods could have foreseen. And in that uncertain dawn, Jon found hope that perhaps, at last, the realms of men had the champion they needed, carved not from fire alone, but from the relentless, enduring heart of ice. Jon Snow stood atop the wooden steps that tenuous. Its powerful wings beat against the night air as it landed on a gust that nearly swept Jon off his feet. He shielded his face with an arm, then stepped forward. The dragon released its burden, the half-frozen body of a giant polar bear. Blood stained the bear's white fur, turning it crimson in broad swaths. Yet what drew Jon's attention was the bear's eyes. Even in the gloom, he could see an unearthly blue glow. That glow often signified white, an undead thrall. And indeed, though most of its torso had been mauled, the bear still twitched with unnatural life. A rasping groan escaped its ruined throat. Jon felt a surge of revulsion. He unslung the dragon glass-tipped spear from his back. The giant bear's limbs spasmed, as if it tried to stand despite the mortal wounds. The dragon hissed, rearing back. His tail lashed the snow. Before the white bear could fully lurch upright, Jon rushed in, plunging the spear into its skull. The hiss of dragonglass meeting undead flesh was audible, a strange sizzling note. The light left the bear's eyes instantly, and it collapsed in a heap, limbs going slack. Jon let out a breath. Even after the Night King's fall, pockets of undead wandered the north, vile remnants of the army of the dead. They were rarer these days, but each encounter was a grim reminder that the threat had not vanished entirely. The ice dragon pressed its snout to the carcass, sniffing as if confused or angered that its prey was corrupted. Jon stroked the beast's neck, noticing how tension rippled through its muscles. "We've more work to do," he murmured. He tugged the spear free, his glove slick with the blackish fluid that passed for blood in whites. The dragon, unsatisfied, clamped its jaws around the bear's neck and heaved it aside, as if discarding tainted meat. Then it swung its head upward, sniffing the air. The faint light of the aurora reflected in its pale eyes, giving it a fierce glow. Jon stayed close, scanning the shadows. If one white lurked here, there could be others. But after a quiet minute, nothing else stirred among the trees below. He exhaled and stepped back. "Come on," he said to the dragon, though he knew it might not heed him. "We'll find proper prey." He glanced at his spear. The dragonglass tip was chipped now. White flesh was not always soft, especially in large beasts. He carefully wiped the fluid off on the snow, then returned the weapon to its sling. With that done, he turned to the ice dragon, raising one arm in the silent gesture by which he sometimes signaled flight. The dragon let out a low rumble, as if uncertain. Usually it did not leave a kill so quickly, but this was no ordinary kill. Jon suspected that even in the beast's primal instincts, the stench of undeath repulsed it. Ultimately, it lowered its shoulder, allowing Jon to climb back into the harness. He secured himself, feeling the tremor of cold radiate through him. Then the dragon beat its wings, lifting them off the plateau in a swirl of snow and wind. They soared southward, following the line of the mountains. The night sky was deep and clear, the stars brilliant. As they traveled, Jon's mind churned with questions. If whites still prowled the wilds, did that mean some fragment of the White Walker's power lingered? Or simply that certain corpses had never been found or burned, mindlessly wandering? He remembered how the men of the Night's Watch had spent months hunting down pockets of undead after the Night King's demise. Some had never been found. Perhaps that was all there was to it. Still, an uneasy feeling gnawed at him. The realms of men believed the war was over. He did not wish to see new horrors arise, especially not in a realm so exhausted by conflict. The flight back to Castle Black took some time. By the time the wall's silhouette loomed, the full moon had risen, casting stark white light across the snowfields. Jon guided the dragon into a wide, lazy arc descending a few hundred yards from the castle gate. Settling in a flurry of snow, the creature folded its wings. Jon dismounted, stumbling slightly as numbness plagued his feet. He had grown more resilient over the months, but the dragon's intense cold always left him stiff and aching. A figure emerged from the gatehouse with torchlight bouncing along the walls. It was Torjin, a new recruit with a patchy beard and timid eyes. "Sir. I mean, Lord. Commander." Snow, Torjin stammered, uncertain how to address Jon. "You've returned." Jon dipped his head in greeting. "I have," he said, patting the dragon's flank once more before stepping away from it. "No trouble here?" Torjin shook his head. "None, my lord. But a raven came for you. It bore the seal of House Serwyn. The steward said you'd want to read it at once." "House Serwyn?" Jon nodded, feeling a faint tug of weariness. "Thank you," he said. He took the torch from Torjin's hands and beckoned him to stand aside so that the dragon would have a clear area if it chose to remain outside the gate. Usually, the beast lingered near the wall or soared off to find some glacial perch, seldom venturing within Castle Black's confines. Indeed, after a moment it let out a soft grunt and turned, loping away in the darkness. Likely it would find a resting spot just out of sight. Jon exhaled, trudging forward. Ghost greeted him just inside the gate, tail sweeping the snow in quiet relief. Jon gave the wolf a brisk rub behind the ears. Inside the courtyard, the Night's Watch men cast wary glances, but they had grown accustomed enough not to scatter. Jon found Ed in the common hall, hunched over a table with a bowl of stew. The place was warmed by a large fire, the air thick with the smell of onions, salted pork, and wet wool. Ed looked up, relief crossing his face. "You're back alive again." Jon forced a small smile. "I have yet to lose any limbs by the grace of the gods." "Torgin said a raven arrived?" Ed nodded, pushing a folded parchment across the table. "Aye, from Serwyn." One of the young couriers was near frantic to deliver it. Jon sat, ignoring the protests of his stiff muscles, and took the parchment. He unsealed it, scanning the neatly penned lines. As he read, his brow furrowed. "They want me to come to Winterfell," he murmured, skimming the second half of the message. "It seems the king in the north has called a gathering of his principal bannermen as well as the more prominent free folk chieftains. They want us to attend." Ed swallowed a spoonful of stew. "Do they say why?" "I assumed everything was settled when you demonstrated control over your ally. Apparently it's an urgent matter." The letter references rumors of renewed undead sightings in the northern forests. "They want to coordinate a response." He paused, weighing the significance. "And they specifically request I come by land, not dragaback." Ed snorted. "I'll bet." "A bit skittish, those southern-minded northerners. They still see it as an abomination." Jon leaned back, folding the parchment. "I can't say I'm eager to bring it to Winterfell anyway. Not if they'd greet it with scorpion bolts and panic. If the undead are stirring, though, that can't be ignored." Ed rubbed his eyes. "We've had our share of white encounters, but I thought we'd all but stamped them out. Maybe it's just rumors blowing out of proportion." "Maybe," Jon allowed, his tone uncertain. He recalled the white bear from earlier that evening, the unsettling glow in its eyes. An ominous feeling weighed on him. Still, House Serwyn wouldn't risk looking like fools by calling a major gathering unless there was some truth in it. The letter says that Lord Serwyn wants to unify the North's efforts. He says every major lord, from White Harbor to Torrens Square, should attend. So it's a northern council. Ed set aside his bowl. "Will you go?" "I should. If the free folk are included, Tormund might be there. We need to ensure no misunderstandings arise. The North still sees the free folk as outsiders, and the free folk still see any castle as a trap. Maybe my presence could keep the peace." Jon massaged his brow. "I'll leave a detachment of the watch here to remain vigilant. We can't all abandon Castle Black." "And the dragon?" Jon sighed. "I'll speak with it, or at least do what I can. I'll ask it to remain in the region while I'm away. Usually it stays near the wall, but I can't force it. It's not a mere beast of burden." He rubbed the stiff feeling in his shoulders. "I'll set out in a few days. Gather a small party to accompany me. I don't want a large entourage, too conspicuous, and it might spook the free folk. But we need enough men to show that the Watch supports this alliance." Ed offered a tired smirk. "Aye, I'll see to it. Though half the men might volunteer just to get a taste of something that isn't salt pork and onion stew." Jon rose, wincing at the ache in his knees. "Let's hope we're not called into war again. The North has lost enough sons." Ed nodded gravely. "That we have?" Jon left the hall, Ghost trailing after him. In his small chamber, he lit a candle and removed his gloves, grimacing at how red and numb his fingers were. Frostbite had left a permanent mark on him. Some fingertips remained partially desensitized, a faint purple tinge from old nerve damage. He warmed them near the candle's flickering flame, letting his mind wander. The prospect of a new threat in the North unsettled him more deeply than he cared to admit. Everyone wanted to believe the war for the Dawn was ended. He did too. But if any remnant of the dead lingered, or if some new force stirred them, the consequences could be dire. He forced himself to rest, though his sleep was fitful, haunted by half-formed images of ice creatures and dragons locked in a silent struggle. By the time dawn arrived, he felt as though he had barely closed his eyes. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparations. Ed oversaw the selection of 10 men to accompany Jon, enough to provide support and represent the Watch without draining Castle Black's limited manpower. Supplies were gathered, horses readied, and a raven was sent back to Serwyn to confirm Jon's imminent departure. In the meantime, Jon made a point of visiting the ice dragon each day, flying short patrols to see if any wights lurked near the wall and leaving fresh kills for the beast to devour. He spoke quietly to it, explaining that he would be gone for a time. He doubted it understood, yet he felt the need to offer some manner of explanation. On the morning of their departure, the sky was a uniform gray, threatening snow. Jon stood in the courtyard, adjusting the sword belt that held Longclaw at his side. Ghost prowled restlessly behind him. The watchmen who would ride with him, Harker, Pate, Rowan, Torgin, and 6 others, were already mounted. Ed approached, arms folded. "Keep an eye on the men," Jon told Ed. "If the dragon grows restless, send a rider to Winterfell. I'll come back as quickly as I can." Ed inclined his head. I will. Good luck, John. If anything untoward comes up, we'll handle it until you return. John thanked him and swung onto his horse, a sturdy black courser with shaggy hooves meant for trudging through deep snow. Ghost loped alongside, tail high. The gates opened with a slow groan. John glanced back one last time, spotting the white silhouette of the dragon perched in the distance. The sight filled him with both reassurance and a strange pang of remorse. He had grown so used to its presence. Then, with a determined nudge of his knees, he guided his horse forward, leading the small column out into the wide northern wastes. They rode south, the men tucked in thick furs, heads bowed against the wind. The journey to Winterfell would take the better part of a week at a steady pace, given the snowy roads and the fact that some mountain passes were still half-blocked by drifts. John had made this trip countless times now, but it never felt easy. The cold gnawed at them. Here and there, the remains of old battles or abandoned camps gave mute testimony to the war's past. Broken spears jutted from snowdrifts, battered shields half-buried. The men grew quieter with each mile, as if reminded that the ghosts of conflict still lingered. On the second day, they camped near the ruins of a small wildling settlement that had been burned during the War for the Dawn. The structures were charred beams and collapsed roofs, the ground covered with blackened debris now sheathed in ice. As the men cleared a space to pitch tents, John scouted the perimeter. Ghost tracked something along the outskirts of the ruins, hackles raised. John hurried over, heart pounding. He found a single footprint in the snow that didn't quite look human, longer, narrower, with elongated claws. Perhaps another white bear or some mutated beast. The track seemed fresh, but it led away into a stand of skeletal pines. After a brief search, John and Ghost found no sign of the creature. Still, the discovery set John's nerves on edge. That night, as the men huddled around a meager fire, the wind moaned through the ruins, a haunting sound that put them all on edge. John kept a watch rotation, ensuring at least 2 men were always awake. He barely slept, half expecting some undead horror to come lumbering from the pines. But the night passed without incident. Come morning, they packed quickly and continued south. By the 4th day, the land grew a fraction less bleak. Sparse forests appeared, patches of thawed ground showing beneath the snow, and distant farmsteads gave a hint of returning life. Still, the men they encountered on the road looked weary and guarded. They recognized the black cloaks of the watch and gave them a wide berth, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Word had traveled, no doubt, that Jon Snow had tamed or partly tamed a dragon of ice. He could almost taste their fear. Winterfell rose on the horizon at last, its familiar towers jutting above the winter-scarred fields. Smoke curled from its chimneys. House Serwyn's banner, adorned with a black battle-axe on silver, flew alongside what remained of House Stark's sigil, though the latter was in tatters and being replaced anew. The seat of the kings in the north had changed hands too many times in recent years. Now it belonged to the new king, a distant cousin of the Serwyn line who claimed ties to the old Starks. Many of the northern lords had accepted him because they saw no better alternative. Jon had refrained from disputing the claim. He wanted no part in crowns or thrones. As Jon and his small column approached the gates, a host of guards in mismatched livery stepped forward. The gates swung open with a creak. Within, the courtyard was crowded. Jon saw knights bearing the sigils of Manderley, Glover, Mormont, and others. Tormund's wildling band had pitched a cluster of makeshift tents in a corner, their furs and bone trophies clashing with the neatly arrayed arms of the northern houses. The tension was palpable. Men eyed one another warily, as though any moment might spark a conflict. The watchers recognized Jon quickly enough, some bowing, others whispering behind hands. He dismounted near the stables, giving his reins to a stable boy who looked awestruck. He nodded to his men. "See that the horses are stabled and fed. Secure lodging if you can. I'll speak with the king." They saluted, though less formally than knights might. Torgin and Harker went off to find the steward of the keep. Meanwhile, Ghost stayed at Jon's side, quietly emanating a presence that kept the curious at a distance. Jon's breath swirled in the cold air as he made his way through the crowd, scanning faces for Tormund or any other familiar figure. Finally, he spotted the big wildling leaning against a cart, talking with one of his own men. Tormund's bright red beard bristled, his weather-worn face cracking into a grin as he caught sight of Jon. "Jon Snow," Tormund boomed, striding over. He wore heavy pelts and a broadsword strapped to his back. "I was wondering when you'd show your gloomy face. Word was you'd come from the wall on your horse rather than on that giant frost lizard you keep." Jon returned the grin. "And risked the entire courtyard in chaos?" "Hardly. It's good to see you, Tormund." He clasped the man's forearm in a warm greeting, feeling genuine relief. "How are your people faring?" Tormund shrugged. We're not used to squatting in fancy keeps, but we'll manage. The king, this Serwyn boy, he tries to speak to us like we're half savages. A wee bit annoying, but we'll put up with it for now. His blue eyes sparkled with interest. He's called a big meat, eh? Says whites have been seen roaming the high passes? So they claim. Jon lowered his voice. I've encountered at least one white bear near the Frost Fangs, so it's not just rumor. I suspect they want to unify the North's response. Make sure the free folk and the lords don't start blaming each other if trouble spreads. Tormund spat. Could be wise. Or could be a trap to keep us all on a leash. But I'll be in the hall to hear what the fuss is about. Jon glanced around. Any trouble so far? Tormund cracked his knuckles. A few stares, a few lords complaining of our wild ways. But no swords drawn, not yet. We're here for answers, same as them. Jon nodded. Let's keep the peace for as long as we can. I'll see what the king has to say. They parted ways, Tormund going back to his men, Jon heading for the Great Hall. Winterfell's stone corridors felt oddly familiar, though the last time he'd been here was under far different circumstances. Torchlight flickered over worn tapestries. Passing servants whispered his name. Eventually, he emerged into the Great Hall, which was alive with voices. The king in the north, Robert Serwyn, though he'd taken the name Stark Serwyn in an attempt to appease tradition, sat at the high seat where Ned Stark once presided. He was young, barely more than 20, with a close-trimmed beard and an anxious set to his shoulders. Gathered before him were various lords and ladies, as well as a few stoic free-folk representatives. Jon's entrance caused a ripple in the crowd. All eyes fixed on him. Robert Serwyn rose from the seat, trying for a regal bearing. Jon Snow, he proclaimed, loud enough for the hall to hear. Warden of the far north, we welcome you to Winterfell. The hush that followed was thick with tension. Jon inclined his head. Your Grace, he said, mindful of the courtesy. I received your summons. I've come to learn more about these rumors of the undead. Robert gestured for Jon to approach. Our scouts and ravens from several holds report sightings of whites, wolves, bears, and even men wandering in scattered pockets. Thus far, no large force has been seen, but there have been attacks on small villages. Farmer families gone missing. Some of those who escaped said they saw corpses prowling at night. We must act swiftly and decisively. A stout lord with a heavy fur collar stepped forward. Jon recognized him as Lord Glover. This cannot be allowed to fester, Glover said. We lost too many to the Night King's armies. If any vestige of that horror remains, it must be stamped out. Lord Manderley, a portly man in a sea-green cloak, nodded vigorously. Agreed. Yet we must be cautious. Our resources are drained after the last war. We can't dispatch men across every inch of the north, or we'll leave ourselves vulnerable to brigands or southern opportunists. A wildling woman with braided hair, who represented one of the clans from beyond the wall, lifted her chin. We're not sitting by. If we see these walking corpses, we smash them. But we're not your thralls. Our fighters act on our own terms. Robert Serwyn raised a placating hand. No one is asking you to be thralls. My lady, we want cooperation. Unity. We all share these lands now. Tormund, who had entered behind Jon, let out a snort. Aye, but the free folk don't kneel easy. We'll hunt the whites, though. We've never needed telling to kill the dead. A chorus of murmurs broke out. Jon sensed how fragile this coalition was. Old grudges lingered, amplified by the memory of the wars. He cleared his throat, stepping forward. We all know how dangerous the whites can be, even in small numbers. The question is how to coordinate, and if there's any chance something or someone is commanding them again. At that, the lords grew uneasy, shifting in place. No one wanted to speak the possibility that the White Walkers might return. From what I've seen, Jon continued, these pockets of undead may be drifting aimlessly, a leftover threat. But they can still kill if they aren't rooted out. The king's hand clenched on the back of his seat. Then we must form a systematic plan. Patrols, hunts, a network of ravens to track sightings. That's why I asked the free folk to join us. They know the northern terrain better than any map can show. And we want the watch's help as well, men who are trained in fighting whites, equipped with dragaglass if need be. Jon could sense the lords had already begun to form alliances and sub-alliances behind the scenes. Some would prefer to see the free folk remain north of the Gift, while others wanted to integrate them as second-class vassals. It was a powder keg of competing interests. But the threat of undead was enough to force them to talk. I'll assist in any way I can, Jon said, trying to project calm. The Night's Watch will do our part. We can spare some rangers to help coordinate hunts, though we're not numerous enough to garrison the entire north. Glover gave a curt nod. Then it's settled? We form parties to scour the known hotspots. Indeed, Robert Serwyn said. I've drawn up potential routes to be discussed in detail with each lord and any free folk chieftains who volunteer. If we can surround and systematically destroy these whites, we'll put an end to the rumors and the danger. His gaze flicked to Jon. I must ask, however, about your dragon. Is it an option here? A hush gripped the hall. Jon felt a surge of discomfort. Of course they would bring up the ice dragon. Many pairs of eyes turned to him, curious, fearful, and hungry. Manderley coughed. If your dragon can freeze these abominations, that might be quite effective, no? Jon measured his words. The dragon isn't a mere tool. It obeys me to a point, but it's not a warhorse that can be dispatched on command. I can use it to hunt whites, yes, as I've done near the wall. But I'm reluctant to bring it south in force. Its presence alone can spread fear and panic among the living. Robet's lips pressed into a thin line. I understand your caution. But if these undead attacks worsen, we may need every advantage. Will you promise to come if we call, with your dragon, to defend any holdfast under siege? Jon inhaled slowly. The notion of leading the ice dragon against a scattered threat across the wide north felt precarious. Yet refusing outright would sow distrust. I will come if the threat escalates, he said at last. But I won't parade it through villages unless it's absolutely necessary. We remember how men reacted to Daenerys's dragons. I don't want the north to fear a second wave of devastation. Robet looked relieved by Jon's semi-agreement. Very well. We hope it never comes to that. But we'll have your word if the worst happens. Nods and murmurs filled the hall. A measure of tension eased, though Jon could still feel the undercurrent of fear regarding the ice dragon. Many saw it as a demon perched at the wall's edge, biding its time. Others saw it as a powerful weapon to be used. None truly understood it, not even Jon. But for now, they found a fragile accord. From there, the gathering devolved into smaller groups discussing routes, manpower, and logistics. Jon fielded a dozen queries about dragonglass stockpiles and whether the Watch could spare more arms. Tormund conferred with other wildling leaders, scowling at the demands some lords made. As the evening progressed, large tables were brought into the hall, topped with pewter plates of roast venison, barley stew, and crusty bread. People ate in uneasy companionship, the business of state blending with forced politeness. The great hall rumbled with voices, clinking dishes, and the swirl of torch smoke. Jon eventually slipped away to a side corridor, seeking a moment of quiet. Ghost padded beside him. He found a small alcove overlooking the courtyard where moonlight shone through a high window. In the courtyard below, he saw the mosaic of tents, free folk huddled around small fires, northern soldiers patrolling, stable boys hauling fodder. The hush of snow drifted over everything, lending the scene an odd stillness. He sighed. The burden of leadership still weighed heavily, even though he'd relinquished crowns and titles. Men looked to him for guidance, uneasy about the undead, uncertain about the ice dragon. A rustle of fabric made him turn. Maester Erek, the new maester assigned to Winterfell, approached. He was a slight, middle-aged man with streaks of gray in his hair, eyes alert behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Forgive the interruption, my lord, but I saw you step away. I hope to speak with you in private. Jon inclined his head. Of course, maester. What is it? The maester folded his hands. I've studied the old texts, including accounts of the Long Night and the legends of ice dragons, though many are contradictory or purely myth. I wondered if you had any fresh insights to share. Jon arched an eyebrow. Such as? Anything about its origin. The accounts I've read imply that ice dragons are as old as the others themselves. Some say they're akin to living shadows, bound to winter's winds. Others claim they come from a land of perpetual night, far beyond the known world. I admit none of it is verifiable, but your experience is unique. Jon exhaled, resisting the urge to shrug. I know little of its origin. We found it asleep in a cavern of ice. It woke when we approached, or perhaps it was just time for it to stir. It breathes a cold that can kill as swiftly as dragonfire. But beyond that, it's not malevolent, at least not if it isn't threatened. The maester nodded thoughtfully. Some records suggest ice dragons cannot be tamed in the conventional sense, which makes your bond all the more remarkable. Could it be that your Targaryen blood resonates with it, just as Valyrian blood resonates with dragons of fire? Or perhaps your Stark lineage, which is steeped in the old magic of the North, makes you a suitable companion for it. Jon bristled slightly at the mention of his parentage, though it was widely known among certain circles. He had never openly flaunted his Targaryen heritage, and it remained an uncomfortable subject. I'm no expert on magic, he said, I can only guess that it sees me as not a threat, or something that belongs to the north. I can't explain it better than that. Eric offered a respectful bow of his head. I appreciate your candor. Should you ever wish to preserve your experiences in writing, I'd gladly assist. It might prove invaluable to future generations. Jon offered a non-committal grunt. I'll consider it, Maester. For now, let's just hope it doesn't come to war. Eric nodded and withdrew, leaving Jon to his solitude again. Ghost leaned against his leg, a silent comfort. Jon stroked the direwolf's fur absently, gazing out at the courtyard until footsteps approached again. This time it was Tormund, his boots scraping on the old floor. The wildling chieftain gave a lopsided grin, though it faded quickly. Done with the fancy talk for the day? Tormund asked. For now, Jon replied. How are your people taking all this? Tormund pursed his lips. They don't trust the Serwyn boy. He might wear a wolf's head on his sigil, but he's no Stark. Still, if it's about killing whites, I figure we can agree on that. We'll join the hunts. Jon nodded. Good. That will help. We need to present a united front or risk letting the undead fester. Tormund huffed. You're sounding more like a lord every time I see you. Present a united front. Risk letting the undead fester. Who taught you all them fancy phrases? Jon managed a small laugh. I'd say necessity taught me, Tormund. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the muffled din from the great hall. Eventually, Tormund clapped Jon on the shoulder. Well, I'll let you brood. You're good at that. My men and I will keep to ourselves tonight. Tomorrow, I'll meet with some of these lords about the hunts. Jon appreciated Tormund's presence. Blunt, unpretentious, and generally honest. Thank you, he said quietly. I'll speak with you in the morning. After Tormund left, Jon lingered a while longer. Thoughts swirled in his mind about the whites, the uneasy truce among so many factions, and the uncertain role his dragon might play. Eventually, fatigue weighed on him, and he retired to the old bedchamber that the steward had prepared for him, a modest room in a distant wing, not the grand chambers once belonging to the Stark lords. He preferred it that way. The space was cold, but at least it offered privacy. He slipped under the heavy blankets, Ghost curling at his feet. In his dreams, he found himself flying astride the ice dragon over a desolate landscape, swirling snow obliterating any sense of direction. Shapes flickered below, an army of the dead, or perhaps living men in black armor. As the dream shifted, he saw Daenerys standing on a battlefield, her hair whipped by wind, her gaze locked on something behind him. When he turned to look, the ice dragon roared, and the vision shattered into darkness. Morning brought a veneer of normalcy. The courtyard bustled with new arrivals, lords who'd slept in tents or wagons, free folk stirring from bedrolls around dying embers, and stable hands scurrying to feed the horses. A sullen sun rose behind a thin veil of clouds, offering little warmth but enough light to see by. Jon donned fresh clothes and made his way to the great hall, where breakfast was laid out, porridge, boiled eggs, and black bread. He found Tormund and a few wildlings at one table, at another. Glover, Manderly, and various lesser lords ate in tense silence. The king in the north was absent, likely conferring with his advisors. Jon grabbed a bowl of porridge and sat quietly. Ghost lay at his feet. The free folk eyed him with a measure of respect. Jon had earned it many times over, though some still mumbled about his alliance with the crows. As he ate, Tormund explained that the hunts would begin in 2 days, fanning out from a midpoint near Long Lake, where white sightings had been reported. Several northern lords and free folk groups would converge, hopefully corralling any undead. The plan felt ambitious, but at least it was a plan. The days that followed were a blur of strategy sessions, supply requisitions, and the forging of uneasy alliances. Jon tried to facilitate, bridging the gap between the free folks' independence and the lords' desire for structure. In truth, he longed to return to the wall, to keep watch on the ice dragon and the frontier. But he knew this work mattered. If pockets of whites were indeed stalking the north, ignoring them could lead to a slow resurgence of nightmares. On the eve of the hunts, a council convened in Winterfell's solar, the king in the north, his closest allies, Jon, Tormund, and a handful of chosen representatives. The talk was pragmatic. How to handle supply lines in the winter terrain, how to burn the bodies of any undead, and how to avoid friendly fire between free folk and northern levies. Despite tension, consensus was reached. They would ride at first light to the staging area near Long Lake. From there, teams would splinter off, each guided by a mix of rangers and free folk scouts. Dragonglass weapons were distributed, though supply was limited. After the meeting, Jon left the keep to walk the courtyard, needing fresh air. Snow drifted down in lazy flakes. He recalled childhood days when Winterfell's yard was full of life. Robb, Arya, Sansa, Bran, Rickon. Ghosts of memory haunted every corner. Now the yard was filled with strangers wearing the sigils of houses that had shifted allegiance or nearly died out. Times changed, and so had he. A soft voice interrupted his reverie. Jon Snow. He turned to see a young woman wearing the sigil of House Mormont, a distant cousin or niece of the late Lady Lyanna Mormont, if he recalled correctly. She was perhaps 15, with fierce eyes and a determined expression. I want to thank you for helping us. My father always told tales of how you fought the Night King. Jon cleared his throat. He still felt uncomfortable being thanked for such grim memories. I only did what needed doing, he replied gently. She nodded, seeming to take that as wisdom. We'll do our part, too. The Bear Island men and women aren't afraid of a fight. I know, Jon said, managing a smile. Your lady aunt was one of the bravest I ever knew. You carry her legacy. Her eyes shone with pride, and she gave a sharp nod before scurrying off, presumably to join her kin. Jon watched her go, thinking how the North's future would rest on such shoulders, young men and women still shaped by war, but determined to keep their homes safe. The reflection brought a faint, bittersweet warmth to his chest. That night, a hush settled over Winterfell. Soldiers and free folk alike turned in early, knowing dawn would bring a harsh ride. Jon found his chambers and tried to sleep, but rest eluded him. He kept picturing the ice dragon's luminous eyes, the swirl of white bears in the dark, and the uncertain alliances among men who shared a common land but not always a common purpose. Eventually, he slipped out of bed, dressed, and wandered the corridors. He arrived at the Godwood, pushing open the old iron-bound door. Snow blanketed the ground, the heart tree's branches heavy with drifts. The red leaves had mostly fallen, but a few clung stubbornly dark red against the pale night. Moonlight slanted through the bare branches. Jon moved quietly to the weirwood face, kneeling at the base of the trunk. Ghost settled behind him, watchful. He bowed his head, letting memories flood him. Ned Stark's calm instruction, Bran's mischief, Arya's rebellious grin. The old gods had seen so much tragedy. He could almost hear them whispering in the wind. He spoke softly, voice muffled by the night. If you can grant us peace, please do so. We've had enough war. The weirwood's carved face remained expressionless, sap-stained eyes gazing into eternity. Jon stayed a while longer until the chill drove him back inside. When dawn came, the courtyard brimmed with riders assembling. Horses stamped and snorted in the cold. Banners flapped, Manderly's merman, Glover's mailed fist, Serwyn's axe, Mormont's spear. And the free folk had no banners, but they had fierce fighters, well adapted to the snowy wild. The king in the north, clad in furs and mail, addressed the gathering with words of resolve and unity. Then groups began to file out in different directions, each leading a contingent. Jon rode near the head of one group, with Tormund, Glover, and a mix of watch rangers and free folk scouts. Ghost loped along. The plan was to meet the others near Long Lake by midday, then set up a base camp and start searching the rumored white-infested areas. The journey to Long Lake was uneventful for the first few hours. The snow underfoot was firm, allowing decent progress. The winter sun hung low, casting elongated shadows. Tormund and Glover spoke in gruff tones about possible infiltration routes the whites could use. Jon mostly listened, occasionally contributing knowledge from his flights on the ice dragon. Around midday, they reached the lake. It was partially frozen near the edges, but dark water showed in the center. A cluster of wooden huts stood on the shore, summer fishing cottages, now abandoned in winter. Several war parties had already arrived. Men busied themselves clearing snow to set up tents, while others scouted the immediate area. Smoke rose from small fires. Jon dismounted, feeling the ache in his thighs from hours of riding. Ghost bounded off to sniff at driftwood and watchful crows. Tormund barked orders to his men, who trotted forward to organize. Glover exchanged curt greetings with other lords. The plan was straightforward. By tomorrow morning, they would dispatch search teams around the lake and into the surrounding forests, systematically combing for signs of whites. Each team carried torches, dragonglass, and a horn to signal if they encountered trouble. Another band would remain at the lake camp to guard supplies and provide reinforcements if a horn was heard. Evening settled with the grim efficiency of men preparing for a hunt. Fires burned, stew cooked in large pots, and tents rose from the snow. Jon found a spot near the largest fire, letting the warmth soak into his legs. He overheard bits of conversation. Some men talked bravely of how they'd put the whites down, while others spoke in hushed tones about the horrors they'd witnessed in the war. Across the flames, Tormund shot him a knowing look as if to say that fear still lurked in many hearts. The night's calm was shattered by an alarm near midnight. Jon jerked awake from a doze in his bedroll at the sound of a horn blast, long, echoing across the frozen lake. He scrambled upright, grabbing Longclaw. Ghost barked, hackles raised. Men poured from tents, brandishing spears and swords. Lanterns bobbed, and confusion spread as everyone tried to locate the source of the horn. Another blast followed, then a third. That meant enemies, or at least something dire. Jon rushed toward the sound, Tormund at his side. Glover and a group of men formed a ragged line near the tree line. Over there, someone yelled, pointing into the dark pines. Shapes flickered among the trunks, moving shapes. Moaning carried on the wind. Jon knew that sound too well. Whites. He unsheathed Longclaw and pushed forward. With the glimmer of lantern light, he could see a half-dozen or more undead forms shuffling out of the forest, their eyes glowing blue. Some were once men, dressed in ragged hides. Others looked like rotting animals, a wolf carcass loping forward with unnatural speed. The men around Jon shouted curses, brandishing dragonglass and steel. Tormund bellowed a wild cry, charging at the nearest white with an axe. Chaos erupted. The whites lunged, silent except for their ghastly moaning. One latched onto a soldier's arm, biting through cloth. The soldier screamed, struggling to bring his dagger around. Tormund's axe whistled, cleaving the white's skull, blackish ooze splattering. Jon slammed Longclaw through a white's torso, but it kept clawing at him, so he yanked the blade free and decapitated it. The head rolled away, jaw snapping. Next to him, Glover speared another white with a dragonglass-tipped halberd. The creature shrieked and dropped, convulsing before stilling. The wildling woman from earlier, the Mormont cousin, fought with surprising ferocity, jabbing a dragonglass dagger into a white wolf's eye. Ghost tore into another undead wolf, ripping it apart, though the dire wolf whimpered as icy jaws snapped at him. Men yelled for torches, and soon flames flickered, revealing more whites staggering from the darkness. The garrison at the camp stirred, horns blowing. A volley of arrows hissed by, some tipped with dragonglass, taking down 2 or 3 more undead figures. Jon pivoted, scanning for any sign that this was a large force. It seemed only a scouting group of whites, if such a notion made sense. Possibly they had been drawn by the smell of living flesh. He cut down another white, bracing himself. The hush of snow was replaced by the ring of steel and the crackle of torches. One white tried to seize him from behind, but Tormund barreled into it, hacking it apart with savage strokes. The confrontation lasted only minutes before the last of the undead was dismembered or destroyed. A few battered corpses twitched on the ground before men set them ablaze. The stench was foul. Breathing heavily, Jon wiped black sludge from Longclaw's blade. Around him, men panted, fear and adrenaline in their eyes. One soldier lay dead, throat torn open. Another was badly mauled. The Mormont girl clutched her arm, blood soaking her sleeve. They just appeared, she gasped. Came out of nowhere. Jon nodded grimly. He knelt by the dead soldier, closing the man's eyes. The whites had wandered straight into their camp or been driven here. We need better perimeter patrols, Glover said, stepping up. His voice shook with anger. We can't be caught unawares again. They might be testing us, Tormund growled. The dead are cunning, even if no master leads them. Jon frowned, recalling the white bear, the track he'd found near the wildling ruins. This attack felt small, but it carried an undercurrent of purpose, as if the whites were probing. We'll double the patrols tonight, he said. At first light, we searched the surrounding area. They might have a den or a group nearby. A grim chorus of agreement rose. Men busied themselves with burning the white remains, gathering them into a single blazing pyre. The battered soldier who survived was taken to a makeshift infirmary. As the firelight danced, illuminating the tense faces of lords and free folk alike, Jon felt the old dread stirring in his gut. This was no mere rumor or leftover straggler. The undead presence was too close, too bold. The rest of the night passed in fitful watches. Jon paced the perimeter with Tormund, scanning the tree line. They spoke little, each lost in thoughts of the past war. Dawn came cold and pale, revealing a camp that was on edge. Soldiers whispered of the old nightmares. The hunts that had been planned were now overshadowed by the immediate threat. Glover, Manderley, and the king's representatives converged around a map at the center of camp. Jon joined them. He pointed to an area of dense forest west of the lake. They likely came from here. We'll form groups and scour that region. If there's a larger pack of whites, we need to find and destroy them. Robert Serwyn, the king in the north, looked tired but resolute. Agreed. I'll lead one party myself. We'll leave enough men to defend the camp. Let's not spread ourselves too thin, though. And so it went. They formed two main search parties. One led by Serwyn, the other by Jon, and a smaller reserve to secure the camp. Tormund joined Jon. Glover and Manderly split their men between both parties, aiming for a balance of free folk and northern soldiers. By mid-morning, they set out, trudging through the snowy woods, weapons at the ready. Ghost scouted ahead silently. The search was eerily quiet. The pines loomed overhead, heavy branches creaking. Snow-muffled footsteps. Men exchanged anxious glances as though expecting a swarm of undead to burst from behind every trunk. After an hour, they found fresh tracks that resembled the footprints of humans but made uneven by decay. The group pressed on, hearts pounding. Eventually, the trees thinned, revealing a small ravine. A trickle of a half-frozen stream cut through the center. Beyond it rose a rocky outcropping. Jon halted the group with a raised hand. Ghost sniffed the air, his ears pinned back. Then Jon saw it, movement among the stones. A figure slouched in the ravine, crouched over the stream as if lapping water. Blue eyes glowed. It was a white, once a man, with half a face stripped of flesh. As Jon signaled stealth, the men spread out, knocking arrows or gripping spears. But before they could close in, the white jerked its head up, releasing a guttural moan. Shadows stirred behind it, more undead. A small cluster, maybe 10 or 12. Tormund cursed under his breath. One of the free folk let fly an arrow, striking a white in the shoulder. The rotting creature didn't collapse but staggered, turning. Then the entire pack screeched, lurching forward with horrifying speed, drawn by the living. Jon bellowed a command, raising Longclaw. The clash began. Dragonglass arrows whistled through the air. Swords and axes met undead flesh. Ghost leapt onto a white, tearing at its throat even as it clawed at his flank. Tormund fought two at once, bellowing with savage fury. Jon stepped in, decapitating one that lunged for a young Glover soldier. Another white came at him from behind, but he spun, kicking it back. A soldier drove a spear into its chest. The entire ravine descended into chaotic violence, the echo of steel and the moans of the undead reverberating off the rocky walls. Though outnumbered, the whites fought with single-minded ferocity. One soldier was dragged down, screaming as two corpses bit into his flesh. Another white lunged at Tormund, who barely managed to hack it apart in a spray of blackened gore. Jon pressed the attack, aiming to thin their numbers quickly, but more figures emerged from behind the outcropping. The group was larger than they first thought, easily 24. Men cried out warnings, horns blew frantically. Amid the swirl of battle, Jon realized they were in danger of being overrun. He shouted for a retreat up the slope to gain high ground. Tormund roared acknowledgement, hauling a wounded free folk fighter with him. Ghost stayed close to Jon, muzzle stained black from the white's foul blood. Arrows continued to fly, some tipped with fire, but it wasn't enough to halt the swarm. The undead advanced relentlessly, climbing the slope with grasping arms. Then a horn blast echoed from the north side of the ravine. Serwyn's party. They had heard the fighting and converged. Reinforcements poured into the clearing, their torches and weapons driving into the flank of the whites. A furious melee erupted. Now the undead found themselves pincered between two forces. One by one, they fell under axe or spear, heads severed, bodies burned. The combined might of both search parties began to turn the tide. After brutal minutes, the last white collapsed, pinned by multiple dragonglass spears. Men panting, they surveyed the carnage. Several were dead or badly wounded, but they had destroyed perhaps 30 undead, far more than anyone expected. Robert Serwyn strode over, sword drawn, eyes wide with horror. "There are too many of them," he said, voice shaking. I thought only a few scattered whites remained. This is an entire nest." Jon bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. A gash on his arm bled, though he barely felt it in the rush of adrenaline. "We need to burn them," he panted, gesturing to the scattered corpses. "And search for more. They might be nesting in caves or among these rocks." Serwyn nodded, summoning men with torches. Soon, flames licked across the ravine as they piled the undead remains. The stench was overwhelming, but none dared leave them unburned. Tormund stood by the pyre, breathing heavily, blood dripping from a wound on his forehead. "You see how many?" he grunted at Jon. This wasn't a small band. Jon swallowed. He thought of the old wars, the endless hordes of undead. No, this was nowhere near that scale. But if there were pockets of 30 here, another 50 there, it could still devastate unsuspecting villages. "We'll search deeper," he said. "If there's a tunnel or cave system, we'll seal or clear it." They fanned out. Serwyn's men explored one side of the ravine, Jon's group the other. Ghost sniffed at nooks and crannies, occasionally growling at suspicious shadows. Some distance up the rocky slope, Jon and Tormund found a narrow entrance half hidden by a fallen pine. The stale smell of death emanated from within. Jon lifted a torch, peering inside. The passage led downward, carved into the rock, wide enough for a man to walk single file. Tormund spat. That's likely their nest. Steeling themselves, they descended, men following with axes and torches. The tunnel was cramped and foul, winding downward into a small cavern. Within, they found a horrifying sight, a half-rotted pile of corpses, presumably the Whites' victims, some partially devoured or reanimated. The stench was unbearable. Jon had to cover his nose with a scrap of cloth. Tormund growled curses under his breath. We burn them all, any that aren't already up and walking. A sense of grim resolve settled over the men. They dragged the bodies outside, forming a second pyre. Some were already beginning to stir, blue eyes flickering with undeath, but they were quickly put down with dragaglass. By the time the task ended, a thick column of black smoke rose above the ravine. Robert Serwyn joined them, pale-faced, as they gazed at the pyres. How many more dens like this are out there? He asked softly. No one answered. Glover shook his head, looking older than his years. Manderly muttered something about the gods punishing them for pride. Tormund scowled at the sky. Jon closed his eyes, feeling the weight of dread. Even if these pockets were small, they still formed a constant threat, an unending hunt that would drain the North's energy. And if, gods forbid, something was guiding them, it could escalate. Fire and dragonglass, Jon said at last. That's all we can do. Keep hunting, burning, pushing them back. We mustn't let them regroup or spread further south. Serwyn tried to straighten, adopting a tone of command. Then that is what we shall do. We'll split up more widely, comb every forest, every cave. And if we need reinforcements, we'll call them up from Winterfell. Glover bristled. We can't stay in these wilds forever. Our lands will go untended, our small folk unprotected. A furious debate flared up among the lords, overshadowed by the acrid smoke of burning flesh. Tormund barked that the free folk wouldn't sit around waiting. Jon listened with growing frustration, watching his fear and exhaustion frayed tempers. Finally, he forced himself to speak. We can't do this alone. If these pockets are scattered across the north, we'll need the Watch, the Free Folk, and every house to systematically root them out over time. Or, he hesitated. Or we use the dragon. Silence fell. All eyes turned to him. Tormund's scowl melted into a frown. Serwyn licked his lips nervously. You mean you bring your ice dragon to scour these forests? Jon squared his shoulders. It can travel faster than any of us, sniff out the dead from above. We could strike swiftly at clusters like this. He paused, the memory of the realm's fear of the dragon lingering. But I won't do it without caution. Panic would spread if people saw it overhead. And controlling it in thick forest might be dangerous. Still, it's an option. Manderly gulped, shifting his considerable weight. Better a monstrous ally than these undead fiends. If it can help end this scourge quickly, I say do it. The North has had enough death. Glover still looked uneasy, but he nodded. It may be necessary. Serwyn drummed his fingers on the hilt of his sword. Then let's do it. I'll dispatch riders to gather men in the region so they know not to panic if they see a dragon. We'll keep them informed. Jon's gaze flicked to Tormund, who shrugged. Just be sure it doesn't freeze us along with the dead. Jon managed a grim half-smile. I'll do my best. Inside, he felt a swirl of trepidation. He had never intended to unleash the ice dragon across the north, but this was exactly the scenario where its power could tip the balance. If these pockets of undead were large and widespread, men alone might not suffice. With the decision made, a new sense of urgency gripped the group. They spent the remainder of the day scouring the surrounding forest, but no additional whites were found near the ravine. At dusk, they returned to the lakeside camp where the other parties had found smaller groups or no whites at all. The presence of a large cluster in the ravine suggested they were among the worst-hit areas. Still, the men were rattled. Some demanded a retreat to safer ground. Others insisted on pressing onward. Robert Serwyn held them together, albeit with effort. Jon penned a quick message to Ed at Castle Black, stating that the undead threat was more serious than expected and that he intended to return for the dragon. He asked Ed to prepare the men and to ensure the dragon's flight was announced to any watchers. Then he chose 2 swift riders from the Watch to carry the message north through the night. Hopefully, they would reach the wall within a couple of days. That night, the camp was on high alert. Fires and torches ringed the perimeter, and men patrolled in pairs. Jon stayed awake well past midnight, sitting by the largest fire with Tormund, Glover, and a few others discussing strategies. Tormund suggested that the free folk could lure whites into open areas where the dragon could unleash its freezing breath. Glover proposed setting up choke points with burning barricades. All the while, the men wore haunted expressions, memories of the last war replaying in their minds. Eventually, Jon lay down in a tent, but his sleep was restless, plagued by nightmares of swirling snow and endless undead. He dreamed of the ice dragon descending upon an army of wights, unleashing a blast of frost that shattered them like brittle glass, yet in the dream, the frost also swept over living men, freezing them mid-scream. He woke with a start, breath ragged, sweat chilling on his skin. He rose at dawn, pushing away the dream. The day was bleak and cold, the sky thick with pewter clouds. Serwyn's men were already stirring, forming new search parties. Jon took Tormund aside. "I'll leave you in charge of the hunts here," he said quietly. "I'm going back to the wall to bring the dragon. It'll take me a few days to ride there and back." Tormund scratched at his beard. I can hold these southern lordlings together for a bit. But hurry, Jon. If more pockets of wights appear, we'll be spread too thin." Jon nodded, clasping Tormund's arm in farewell. He explained the plan to Serwyn and Glover, who agreed that Jon's return with the dragon might be the turning point they needed. With that, Jon gathered a small escort, loaded supplies, and set out for the north once more. The journey weighed heavily on him, each hoofbeat reminding him of what was at stake. They rode briskly, pausing only to rest the horses. Snow fell sporadically, sometimes thick enough to blind them. Jon's mind churned with the logistics of controlling the ice dragon in dense forests, the risk of friendly casualties, and the potential for panic among small folk who saw a winged terror overhead. Yet the memory of that ravine stuffed with undead spurred him on. If they failed to act decisively, the north could slide back into a slow-moving horror. By the time they reached Castle Black, nearly 4 days later, the men were exhausted and the horses lathered. Jon found Ed in the courtyard, looking relieved and worried at once. "We received your message," Ed said. "We've warned the surrounding villages that you may be flying the dragon south. They're frightened, but better frightened than unprepared." Jon dismounted stiffly. "Thank you, Ed. I'll rest a few hours. Then I'll ride the dragon at daybreak." "How have things been here?" Ed grimaced. "Quiet except for the usual tension. The dragons roamed near the wall, but it hasn't harmed anyone. A couple of watchmen say it vanishes for days at a time, then reappears to perch near the gate. Maybe it hunts far north." Jon nodded, remembering how the creature often flew to the Frostfangs or beyond, only to return. "I'll speak with it tonight." He took a brief rest, eating a hot meal and soaking his aching muscles by the fire. Then, as dusk fell, he donned his thickest furs and trudged outside. Ghost followed, tail swishing in silent greeting. Sure enough, he spotted the white silhouette of the dragon perched on a snowy rise north of the gate. A swirl of wind whipped up drifts around it. Jon crossed the open ground, snow crunching underfoot. His breath billowed in the frigid air. The ice dragon watched his approach with those pale, moon-like eyes, its massive head tilted. Jon could almost sense its primal awareness. Ghost let out a low whine, hanging back. Jon raised a gloved hand in greeting. "We need you," he said quietly, as if speaking to an old friend. "The undead have returned in pockets, threatening the living. I need your help to stop them." The dragon exhaled a rumbling breath that frosted the air. Jon stepped closer, placing a hand on its flank. The cold radiating from its scales stung his skin, even through heavy gloves. He closed his eyes, steadying himself. "Tomorrow, I'll mount you and fly south. We'll hunt the dead, or as many as we can find." He didn't expect an answer, but the dragon let out a sound, deep, resonant, neither hostile nor calm. Perhaps it was a grudging acknowledgement. Jon gently patted its hide. "It will be dangerous," he added, though the creature hardly needed warnings about danger. "But we must act." He spent that night in the castle, trying to sleep but failing to keep his mind still. Finally, near dawn, he rose and prepared the harness. Word spread among the watch that Jon Snow would depart with the ice dragon. Men lined the ramparts and courtyard, bracing themselves to witness the spectacle. Ed accompanied Jon to the gates, along with a handful of rangers. Ghost was there as well, though Jon had decided to leave him behind again, not wanting to risk the wolf in flight. The dire wolf nuzzled Jon's hand, then stepped aside. Jon approached the dragon with the harness slung over his shoulder. He carefully fastened it around the creature's neck and shoulders, the leather straps and buckles tested and retested many times. The watchers murmured and gasped, still unsettled by the sheer size of the beast. Once he was ready, Jon strapped himself in, ignoring the sharp pang of cold that stabbed through every limb. He tugged the rein-like straps and murmured, "Fly." The dragon coiled its hind legs, wings spreading to blot out the pale sunrise. With a thunderous leap, it launched skyward, buffeting the courtyard with icy wind. Men shielded their faces, cursing or shouting. Ghosts barked in alarm. Jon clutched the spines, feeling that familiar rush of vertigo. In moments, they were soaring above Castle Black, the wall stretching below like a grand barrier. The air was razor-sharp, slicing through his furs. He grit his teeth, focusing on the mission. They circled once, then Jon guided the dragons south, aiming for the route that led to Long Lake. As they picked up speed, the howling wind battered Jon's senses and the cold numbed his extremities. He recalled how the dragon's flight had always been punishing, but he'd grown more resilient over time. Even so, it was brutal. Each breath stung his lungs. But the land slid by beneath them at a pace no horse could match. Forests, hills, and frozen streams passed like fleeting images. Over the course of hours, he navigated by landmarks, scanning for the camp near Long Lake. He guessed they could make it by midday if the dragon didn't deviate. His eyes watered, threatening to freeze, but he persevered. Occasionally, the dragon roared, echoing across the sky. Villages or travelers below might glimpse them, no doubt stirring fresh fear. But speed was paramount. At last, he spotted Long Lake's dark expanse. Wisps of smoke rose in the distance, surely the camp. He directed the dragon lower. As they descended, the camp came into view, more fortified than before, sharpened stakes, watchtowers, lines of torches. When the massive white shape appeared overhead, horns blared and men scrambled, some brandishing weapons. Jon prayed they wouldn't unleash arrows. He swooped in a wide arc, letting them see the figure astride the dragon. Gradually, the initial panic subsided, though the tension was palpable. He guided the beast to land on a broad patch of open ground near the camp, well away from tents and fires. Snow exploded outward as the dragon's claws touched down. Jon unfastened the harness, shoulders stiff. Men approached cautiously. Tormund was at the forefront, hand raised to shield his face from the blowing snow. Lord Glover and Robert Serwyn followed, eyes wide. Soldiers formed a ring, many holding spears or torches in trembling hands. Jon slid off the dragon's flank, nearly staggering from numbness. Tormund hurried over, clasping his arm. "You truly are mad, Snow," Tormund muttered, though he grinned with relief. "You came fast." Jon forced a laugh through chattering teeth. "Faster than a horse. How stands the battle against the dead?" Serwyn stepped forward, gaze flicking nervously to the dragon's looming silhouette. "We've scoured the forests. Found more whites, smaller bands. We've lost some good men, but at least we're pushing them back. The biggest threat might be deeper in the woods to the east." Glover nodded. "We've had reports of a larger gathering near the foothills. The Free Folk Scouts say it could be 50 or more. Possibly more caves like the ravine." Jon glanced at the dragon, which folded its wings, exhaling a misty breath that crystallized in the air. "Then that's where we start," he said. "We can search from above and strike quickly if we find them. But we must keep people clear of the area to avoid accidents." Tormund barked a laugh. I'll not be standing under that freezing breath. Let's gather volunteers." And so began the next phase of the hunt. Over the following days, Jon flew daily scouting missions, scanning vast swaths of forest. He carried a signal horn. When he spotted clusters of whites, he landed at a safe distance to rendezvous with Tormund or Serwyn's men, planning strikes that combined ground forces with the dragon's devastating frost. The first time they deployed the ice dragon against a large white gathering was a revelation. Jon soared above the trees, located a clearing where the undead had clustered, and unleashed a blast of freezing breath. The whites froze solid, their limbs encased in ice. Some shattered on impact with the ground. Others were easily cut down by men on foot. The sight filled Jon's allies with awe and relief, though a few men vomited at the grisly aftermath of half-shattered corpses still twitching in the snow. Word spread quickly of the ice dragon's hunts. Free folk and northern soldiers alike began to rely on it, calling it down whenever a sizable band was found. Jon had to be careful, always ensuring that no living allies were too close to the target area. The dragon's frost breath was indiscriminate. More than once, an overzealous fighter nearly got caught in the blast. Thankfully, Jon's warnings prevented casualties. Still, each time he felt the raw power of the dragon, his stomach knotted. This was indeed a force akin to a small godwood. If it turned on them or if he lost control, the toll would be catastrophic. But the hunts were working. Bit by bit, they rooted out white dens, burned the remains, and whittled down the undead presence. Over weeks of coordinated effort, the number of sightings dropped. Villages reported fewer attacks. Lords and free folk began to relax, though the memory of those savage fights lingered. Serwyn, Glover, Manderley, and Tormund all expressed cautious optimism that the tide was turning. During this time, Jon remained in the field, seldom returning to the main camp. He slept in small outposts, always mindful of how the dragon reacted to new surroundings. The beast seemed content enough so long as it had wide open areas to rest and hunt. Jon spent countless hours aloft, scanning the snowy world below, bracing against the wind's relentless assault. Sometimes, in the hush of flight, he marveled at how high they could climb, clouds drifting beneath them, the horizon curving away. But the beauty was always tinged with the knowledge of what they were doing, a grim extermination of undead that threatened to unravel the North's fragile peace. As the final pockets of whites were destroyed, men cheered the dragon's arrival instead of cowering. Some started calling it Frostbane, though Jon never officially named it. Others referred to it as Icefire, conjuring the dual notion of a dragon of ice with the power to lay waste like fire. Jon felt uncertain about naming a creature that might outlive them all, a being belonging more to myth than to men. Within a month of tireless campaigning, reports indicated that white sightings had dwindled to near zero. The hunts had been brutal, but apparently effective. Robert Serwyn declared victory in the Great Hall of Winterfell, praising the combined efforts of all houses and the free folk, and crediting Jon and his dragon for tipping the scales. It was an odd celebration. Men raised cups of ale, toasting the end of the threat. The mood was jubilant yet overshadowed by the memory of those they'd lost. Jon found little joy in the feast. He excused himself early, heading to the courtyard where the dragon perched. There, under the moonlight, he stroked the creature's cold scales, feeling relief mingled with a pang of sadness. The war might be over, or at least this threat subdued, but peace was fragile. The North and the free folk still needed to learn to coexist. And the rest of Westeros remained uneasy about the existence of an ice dragon. Serwyn's rule was not universally beloved. The scars of the past war still ran deep. Jon wondered if the realm would ever truly be free from the fear of undead or dragons or the next power-hungry lord. He thought of the old prophecy about the prince that was promised, the union of ice and fire. Perhaps he and this dragon were part of that tapestry, an uneasy harmony that lived on the edge of a sword. As he stood there, Tormund appeared, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the moonlit sky. "You brooding again, Snow?" he asked, chuckling softly. "We did what we set out to do. The dead are gone. For now," Jon murmured. "There will always be more threats." Tormund shrugged. "So we fight them if they come. That's life in the North. You worry too much." Jon turned, half smiling. "Maybe you're right, Tormund. Maybe I do." He gazed again at the dragon. "I'm just not certain if peace is ever permanent." Tormund clapped him on the back. "Nothing's permanent. But for a while, we can drink, eat, and enjoy breathing. That's enough for me." Jon sighed, a quiet chuckle escaping his lips. "Aye, that might be enough." The next day, a final council was held. The king in the north publicly thanked Jon and Tormund, vowing continued friendship between the free folk and the northern houses. Glover and Manderley echoed the sentiment. Some men still bore injuries or grief, but they recognized that they'd worked together for a common cause. Plans were made for rebuilding the ravaged areas, fortifying them against any future undead. Ravens carried the news to the rest of Westeros, proclaiming that the North had faced another threat and defeated it, thanks in part to the fearsome ice dragon under Jon Snow's command. When the council concluded, Jon found himself faced with a choice. Serwyn offered him a formal position as protector of the North, a role akin to a warden, giving him official authority to rally the houses in defense of the realm. It was a prestigious title, one that would effectively place him second only to the king in the North. The new king insisted it was the least they could do for the man who repeatedly saved them from annihilation. But Jon hesitated. Titles had never brought him anything but trouble. He recalled how taking the crown as king in the North before had led to betrayal and heartbreak, how discovering his Targaryen heritage had caused strife. He thought of the Night's Watch vows that once defined him, vows that might be obsolete now but still shaped his sense of duty. "I'm honored," he said at last, "but I prefer not to hold such a title. I'll continue my watch at the wall and beyond with this dragon. If danger returns, you need only send word and I'll come." Serwyn pressed him, asking if he was sure. Glover weighed in, saying that without a firm hand in Winterfell, the North might slip into old rivalries. But Jon held firm. "My place is in the North, but not here in this hall. The watch taught me duty. And the dragon belongs in the wild. We'll stand guard there, the first line of defense." In the end, the king relented, though not without a show of regret. Tormund, for his part, said he'd return to the far north beyond the wall with his free folk once repairs and resettlement were done in some of the borderline regions. They parted on good terms. The realm had found a measure of stability, albeit fragile. And so, a week later, Jon Snow took his leave of Winterfell. Once again, the courtyard filled to see him depart on the back of the ice dragon. The king in the north and his lords gathered to bid farewell. Tormund stood with his wildling comrades, arms folded across his broad chest. Some of the men and women who had fought alongside Jon saluted, gratitude in their eyes. Children clutched their mothers' hands, marveling at the dragon's colossal form. Ghost crouched near Jon, reluctant to leave his side, but ready for the journey. Jon donned his thick furs, strapped on his harness, and mounted the dragon, who stirred with restless energy. He gave a final nod to Tormund, who shouted, "Don't freeze your balls off up there." The crowd chuckled nervously. Jon smirked, though his face remained solemn. Then he tugged the straps and the dragon launched skyward in a swirl of snow. Gasps and cheers erupted below. The beast's wings beat powerfully, carrying Jon and Ghost, who remained on the ground for now, higher into the gray sky. The courtyards and towers shrank beneath them. Once they were high enough, Jon guided the dragon northward. Ghost would follow on foot alongside a small band of rangers traveling back to Castle Black. Jon planned to land every so often to rejoin them, ensuring they moved as a coordinated group. But for now he savored the solitude of flight. The wind roared, biting his cheeks. Clouds parted, revealing bleak fields and rolling hills below. After many days of constant battles, counsel, and tension, a strange calm settled in him. They had beaten back the undead once more. They had formed alliances between wildlings and lords. And though uncertainties remained, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. As the miles fell away, Winterfell receding behind him, he reflected on the path that had led him here. A bastard of Winterfell, once a member of the Night's Watch, then king in the north, then something else, now a man astride an ice dragon, neither king nor common knight, but a guardian of a realm still finding its way. He had chosen a life beyond titles, beyond crowns, carrying a weighty responsibility to protect the living from threats both ancient and unforeseen. The horizon stretched endlessly, a swath of ice and cloud. Somewhere far ahead lay the wall, Castle Black, and the deep wilderness beyond. The wind carried the dragon's keening cry as it soared. Jon pressed himself close to its neck, feeling the rhythmic surge of its breath. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaling the sharp winter air. This was his place, between the quiet expanse of the northern sky and the cold earth below, tasked with vigilance in a world that had nearly succumbed to darkness more than once. The dragon roared again, a sound both haunting and triumphant, echoing across the snowbound plains. Jon opened his eyes, scanning the distant white. A single thought resonated in his mind. He would do whatever it took to ensure the realm never fell to the dead again, so long as breath remained in his body. The old gods, the new gods, perhaps even the Lord of Light, had seen fit to bind him to this creature of winter's essence. Where ice and fire once clashed, now a tenuous harmony existed, a living testament that the North and all the realms of men could endure if they stood together. And with that final reflection, Jon Snow and his ice dragon vanished into the northern sky, leaving behind a land that breathed a weary sigh of relief and carrying forward into an uncertain future. Vigil and sentinel against whatever lingering shadows might still stir in the frozen wastes beyond the wall.